on live on YouTube. And Tarun Bhaiya, I would request first everyone to join us for the ICAI motto. I'll just play that.
येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
Thank you, friends. Friends, I, Vivek Agarwal, convener of ACAE Study Circle, welcome you all for a very important topic, forensic accountant. When I say forensic accountant, many people get confused that we have always understood there's something called forensic audit. But what is this forensic accountant? This confusion is there because we have always come up with this layman word of forensic audit, and actually the audit and forensic accounting are two different spheres. When we were drafting the forensic accounting standards issued by ICAI, it was discussed in detail, and the difference was there, and I think Satish sir will be taking a few minutes on that as well. And friends, we are really proud to have ICAI as the first body which has issued forensic accountant. Forensic accounting standards are there, and it is utmost important that we get a synopsis of it. Thereby, we'll teach you how to do fishing will not catch the fish for you. So we are here to give a curtain raiser type for you to understand that there is something called forensic accounting standards, and what is the expectation of the industry, how industry sees this forensic accounting profession as such, and as a forensic accountant, what you are expected to do. So we have two renowned speakers, CS Satish Shinoyji, who has been there for us in our last forensic accounting session as well. And he is here from industry explaining what is the expectation and also giving a brief synopsis of the forensic accounting standards. And we have Deepa Agarwalji, who will be speaking on the role of the auditor in forensic accounting ecosystem as such. We were just discussing that if you get any issue, any fraud is recognized, the first person who is thought about or who is questioned is an auditor. What was the role of the auditor? What was the auditor doing? So for this purpose, we have this very interactive session, and I give over the proceeding to Tarunji to give a brief introduction of two speakers, and then hand over the proceeding to our learned speaker. Over to Tarunji.
Thank you, Vivek. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you, President and Convener, ACAI Chartered Accountant Studies Circle, CA Vivek Agarwal. On today's topic of forensic accounting, as introduced by our President and Convener, I welcome the two learned speakers, CA Satish Shinoyji and CA Deepa Agarwal, Madam. CA Satish Shinoy currently heads the corporate management audit function at the Aditya Birla Group, which has a turnover of nearly 50 billion US dollars and operations worldwide. Sir has had a very illustrious career, and sir is also a chartered accountant, cost accountant, company secretary, and holds a diploma in central excise and was 8th rank holder in the final CS exam way back in 1988. as I initially said, sir carries a very illustrious career and has over 37 years of experience in internal audit, risk, forensics, ethics, and various functions in PSUs and private sector entities such as HPCL, Onida, Lupin, Retail, Reliance Retail, and L&T. Sir was also on deputation with the Oil Coordination Committee. Sir is very closely associated with our institute, the Institute of Internal Auditors, and various other institutes. Sir, with your permission, I'm just skipping some of the points in your illustrious CV. This is also very interesting to note that Sir is an avid cricket player and has special passion for driving and trekking. He also loves listening to Indian classical music and English songs. With these few words, I welcome CA Satish Noy ji on the platform of ACAE, Chartered Accountant Studies Circle. Sir, very warm welcome to you, and we look forward to your deliberations, sir. Before I hand it over to CA Satish Noy ji, I will also briefly introduce the other speaker, CA Deepa Agarwal, madam. She is a BCom FCA with a 13th rank all over India and 5th rank in NIRC in the CA exams. Ma'am has over 20 years of experience in serving national and multinational companies in the areas of auditing and accounting, corporate laws, and other related matters. She has completed information system audit course from our ICAI and also a certified course in IFRS. She has worked with the technical directorate of ICAI for almost 5 years and was involved in preparation of various publications. Currently, ma'am is working with renowned consultancy firms since almost last 16 years in a technical role, dealing with accounting, auditing, Companies Act, risk management, and quality related matters. Ma'am was a special invitee on the AASB of ICAI for 2 years and is a special invitee on corporate laws and governance committee of ICAI currently. Ma'am is also an author of various books and publications which have been published by Bloomsbury Publishing House PLC. Ma'am is also a faculty at ICAI for various courses which are conducted by our institute. With these few words, ma'am, I also welcome you very warmly on the platform of ACAE Chartered Accountant Studies Circle, and we also look forward to your deliberations, ma'am. With these few words, thank you. I now hand it over to CA Satish Noy ji to start the deliberations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So what I do is I'll just give a small brief introduction to the topic, say about 10-15 minutes, bordering around the lines that Vivek was talking about. And then 1 hour, Deepa will take us through the entire other aspects of investigation, of auditing, etc. And I'll take the last 1 hour or so for the specific expectations and what is it that we as practitioners need to do so far as our emerging or emergent practice is concerned. So that will be the line of the process. And I'll request a lot of questions. You know, see, it's rather than me talking, the subject is so wide. I can keep talking on this subject, which might or might not be useful to you. And therefore, I would urge each one of you in the audience, and I'm happy to see that there are 107 participants as I speak, and I hope at least 90% will remain till the end of the program. That is now up to Deepa and me, and we'll assure you that we will do justice to the topic. So my request to all of you would be that you please ask questions, because if in these questions, we'll be able to give our perspective if we have it. If we don't have it, we'll get the perspective. But it is important that, you know, the audience is kept in mind. And therefore, instead of just me reeling out and Deepa reeling out on what we know or what we think we should speak, it might be better and more appropriate if we get questions. So my humble request to all the participants is that please keep asking questions in the, I think there is a question and answer box. So please drop your questions there, or you can drop it on chat. And I'll be very happy to even look at these questions, or maybe Vivek or Tarunji can probably go through these questions, but we would be happy to have that. So first of all, a very happy evening to all of us. I profusely thank the ACA Study Circle for this opportunity given to Deepa and me. All these words are not said as a courtesy or as a formality, but sincerely thank you. And all the members who are attending today on a Thursday afternoon, which is fantastic. And I also see that you guys are doing so many programs, and despite that, we are having a attendance which is in 3 digits. So I'm ever so grateful for it. So I'll just give a brief background about the forensic accounting and investigation. I must say that I very much enjoyed being part of the well-oiled team that wrote up the standards for the CA Institute. And with its publication, as Vivek was mentioning, the CA Institute became the only institute in the accounting world which has developed a full set of standards for its professionals. So I thank all the team members, including Vivek Agarwal, who was part of the team, and of course our captain, CA Harish Dua. And I think the most important thing was that I learned a lot in the process. It was not just a participation, and if you think that I know everything and therefore I was part of the team, no, there were many things that I learned, and I felt that smaller the town, the bigger was the learning for me. So it just goes to show that you can today, with technology around, you can sit in any part of the world and work for any client right across. So there are no more boundaries. So let me get started and talk about what is forensic accounting. So it is the discovery and evaluation of evidence by a professional to interpret and communicate findings suitable for a court of law. Repeat, suitable for a court of law. The overriding objective of forensic accounting is to discover facts and evidence, especially in the area of financial transactions and operational elements, to help the professional report findings to reach a conclusion, but not to express an opinion, and support a legal case in a court of law or a regulatory body. So the emphasis here is on the court of law or being done for a regulatory body. A litigation is a process of handling or settling a dispute in a court of law or before a regulatory body, and litigation could include mediation and alternative dispute resolution mechanism. And a fraud is an intentional or deliberate act to deprive another of property or money through deception and other unfair means. Now, if I am going to do forensic accounting work, what is it that I need to have? No rocket science, but there are certain specific things that one needs to take care of in this particular practice. Some of them are principles which are known. Some of them could be something which is very specific to forensic accounting. Independence. What does independence mean? It means that we shall be independent and neutral in mind, conduct, and appearance. And all of these things are important. We have to be independent in our mind. We have to be independent in our appearance. And most importantly, we must be independent in our conduct. So we have this even in the normal auditing, that we should not have anything to do with we should be independent so that we can express our opinion most appropriately. Integrity and objectivity. I think these terms are also well known and absolutely well tuned for our practice. The professional shall be honest, truthful, and a person of high integrity. We should not be getting into any activity which will either be bad for us as individuals or for the profession. We have to avoid conflicts of interest, and we should conduct the work in a highly objective manner, especially in discovering evidence and evaluation of facts. Okay, due professional care, and this aspect we have also heard in our auditing, that we shall exercise due professional care and diligence while carrying out engagements. Now, what does due professional care mean? And what does it imply? It implies that reasonable care has been exercised in carrying out the work to ensure that the achievement of the planned objectives, adequate focus and attention are given to matters of importance, which means that we have to start judging what is matters of importance along with diligence in time management. Measures are in place to comply with the professional standards of work. Every profession, be it accounting, legal, medicine, any profession has its own standards, and obviously we need to abide by it. Confidentiality is another very important thing. We shall maintain utmost, and this is an expectation. I mean, I'm covering some part of my next session as well when I talk about all this. We have to maintain utmost confidentiality of all information which comes to us during the course of engagement. This includes the need to protect privacy rights of the suspect and to discover evidence in a manner which does not infringe upon the privacy rights of individuals. Because in a forensic accounting or an investigation work, we'll be required to investigate, we'll be required to interrogate, we'll be required to question people who are suspects, but we must not, just because that they are suspects, there is something called privacy rights, which we should completely adhere to. Skills and competence. This is another particular aspect that is very important. We should have the necessary qualification. Of course, the chartered accountant qualification is definitely something that is required, but there are so many other aspects that get involved in a forensic audit that we have to supplement our qualifications with legal qualifications, post-qualification certificate courses, which I'm sure Deepa will be able to tell us a little more about. There are ample of global certifications, qualifications, and other credentials which carry equal weightage. Besides this, it's not all about technical skills, but there is behavioral skills also in forensic accounting work. It's not just technically I need to be good, but then there are so many different behavioral skills that we need to bring to bear in any assignment. Contextualization of the situation. That means the FAI engagements cannot be conducted in isolation. The context of the situation, the environment where the transactions or operations take place is important to understand the complete picture. Each forensic accounting or investigation assignment is unique. The nature of the business, the situation, the complexity of the environment, the circumstances at the time and in the manner in which all this comes together, plus the involvement of the people in affairs, all need to be well understood to develop a suitable plan of action. Primacy of truth. In any FAI engagement, all the activities that we do shall be centered around finding the truth. What exactly happened, how it happened, when did it happen, who made it happen, or who was the person responsible for something to happen or not happen. And that is all our activities should revolve around these questions. Therefore, the primary objective of any professional is to unearth the reality behind every allegation or dispute, which in turn shall be based on facts, figures, and reliable evidential matter. I'll be talking about evidence finding a little later, but everything should revolve on facts, figures, and reliable evidential matter. We have to respect the rights and obligations, both of the accused, if it comes to it, and everybody has a right to defend their innocence. Ample opportunity should be given to all parties to present their evidence and perspective. We have to separate the facts from opinions. This is very important in a FAI assignment. The FAI assignment is predominantly a fact-finding exercise. The professionals will ensure that their personal judgment and biases find no place in the exercise. Personal perspectives should be separated from professional judgment, which in turn shall not be clouded by the noise in the evidence. Quality and continuous improvement is something that we need to do both in our work as well as in the process of issuance of reports. Now I'll talk very briefly. I have about 7 minutes left before it's 4:30, and Deepa will take the next 1 hour or so. But I'll just talk very briefly about the types of services that are emerging. Rather, not only emerging, they have already emerged. Okay. But however, as an emerging practitioner, we need to do a mix and match of the following. One is, and these are my humble suggestions, one is to run a wide variety of forensic services. We should limit it to only a few activities. Okay, these things I will do, but if it comes to this, some other activity, I'm not really doing it. I'll do the investigation, but I will not do the interview. These things do not happen. We have to run a wide variety of services. I'm great at looking at laptops, but I can't look at phone data. This is not on. So we have to run a wide variety of forensic services. We need to serve law enforcement agencies, and therefore not only law enforcement agencies, but government agencies, crime labs, corporations, private sector, and other professional firms. And I'll be talking a bit about the law enforcement agency, dealing with agencies in the second part. We have to enhance our reputation for outstanding integrity and attention to detail. And this is something that I need to specifically call out. We must have the ability to go into detail in the matters, because it's not an audit, it is something beyond an audit. We have to use embedded technology and computer forensic investigation. We need to have experts for each area of expertise. And this is a very, very important thing. You know, we say that we can rely on the work of an expert, but for each area, we will need to have experts handling the activity. We may have to have a well-equipped lab to do investigation. It might be necessary for us to have a lab to do investigations. And we could either have it or we could borrow time from some particular laboratories which are available for this purpose. We need to deliver services with integrity, professionalism, and high ethical standards. And we need to serve the community and treat each case with the attention and detail it deserves. I'll call out a few of the types of services which are now very rampant for a forensic practitioner. One is the digital forensics, and I think digital forensics is the thing forward. To provide professional excellence in digital forensic investigation for electronic devices to solve computer crime. And digital forensics can play an essential role in all types of investigation and reveal the evidence which is vital to the case. Computer forensic services is a field of knowledge that scrutinizes digital media with the aim of identifying, preserving, recovering, analyzing, and presenting digital information. For both of these services, we need to have reliable methods of capturing both persistent and violent data, as well as preserve the integrity of such data. We need to possess the expert knowledge and skills, as well as modern tools and technologies needed for efficient computer forensics. We need to have the capacity to scrutinize and recover digital information from mobile phones, laptops, digital cameras, hard and flash drives, website, corporate servers, email, and web servers, among others. We need to have capabilities to identify evidence, preserve the integrity of recorded evidence, organizing and presenting the evidence logically, and making court appearances to help validate the recovered evidence as well as the evidence collection process. Background checks has become another very important aspect of our practice. This includes personal history, employment history, education history, social security validation, address history, sex offenses, registry check, criminal records check, global watch check, driving records check, and so many other aspects. Mobile phone forensics is the other area that we can all think about. social media forensics. From their humble beginnings, social media forums have become powerful tools for communication and globalization. They have also become accessories for business organizations to attract new clients, advertise products and services, and consequently boost profitability. E-discovery I will be talking about in my second part, but it is a process comprising of many different actions linked together, which usually begins with when a lawsuit is filed and ends once any evidence is presented to courts. Then there is the social media crisis management, social network investigations, cyber security, internal investigations, and the like. Last but not the least, I will talk about very briefly about white collar crime. The white collar crime comes from an outdated assumption that business executives wear white shirts and ties. Today, of course, I wore a dark shirt. And when a person or group of persons violate the law in the course of a legitimate business enterprise or occupation. And to understand white crime in India, we have to understand bank frauds, blackmail, bribery, cellular phone frauds, computer fraud, counterfeiting, credit card fraud, currency schemes, embezzlement, environmental schemes, extortion, engineering, fake employment placement rackets, forgery, healthcare fraud, insider trading, insurance frauds, and those are becoming very big now. Investment schemes, kickback, larceny, theft, legal profession, medical profession, money laundering, racketeering, security fraud, tax evasion, and I can go on and on this, telemarketing fraud, welfare fraud, weights and measurements, and so many other stuff. These are becoming absolutely imperative for we practitioners to definitely remain focused on these aspects. So I'll now request to spend the next 1 hour or so on different aspects of forensic accounting, and I'll take the last hour and questions that really come up for concluding the session. So over to you, Deepa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful deliberation. And thank you, Vivek, and thank you to the entire ACA team for inviting me to this session. And I'm sure, as Satishi mentioned, that our request is please ask as many questions as possible, and I'll try to make the interaction more, kind of participating for you and interesting for you. So I'll just share my screen. So because I'm a presentation person, so I think let me know once it's visible.
Yes, Deepa, we can see.
Just a second. Yeah. Okay. So I think the context has been set. Fraud, risk, and reporting. I mean, this is something which is like most widely debated. These are just disclaimer for the presentation. So very much in debate, very much in focus, not just when we talk about as a practitioners, as a chartered accountant, as a forensic accountant, it is very much its focus and for the regulators as well. So how I structured the presentation and what I'm going to talk about in the next 1 hour is to talk about the recent update and regulatory trends. So why this forensic accountant, why the ICA felt the need for issuance of these standards. And well, Satishi was part of the the standard making process, so he can definitely share a very good experience and give us that insight. But what I'm going to talk about is what was the recent updates and how is the regulator focus is keep on increasing, and how they are just trying to make sure that the information which is being disclosed to the shareholders, to the stakeholders, is actually is a variety of information, relevant information, timely information. So if I just talk about the recent changes which happened in Schedule 3 or your auditor's report. So if you look at the auditor's reporting amendment rule as well as your CARO, there are a whole lot of changes just to make sure that as an statutory auditor, we are doing our duties correctly. We are making our reports are crystal and clear, and though our reports are very lengthy. So if I compare it with the standard reports which are there in the internationally, our reports are running into pages. And with the new CARO, if you look at the subclauses, those those are 50 clauses and subclauses put together. So the report is really going to be very lengthy. But again, the message is very clear that the regulatory focus is increasing on, especially on the fraud reporting. And then I'm going to talk about the requirement under the Companies Act, which will include your CARO and fraud reporting. And then forensic investigation will touch base on whether it's a substitute or supplement to audit. So I think when Vivekji mentioned in the beginning that, how do we draw the line? So it is very important to understand what is the role of the statutory auditor and when do we actually need an expert. So forensic investigation or forensic accountant, when actually they have to come and play the role, to make sure that whenever there is such instance of fraud or whenever any investigation has been ordered by a regulator, or even if the management wants to conduct an investigation basis a whistleblower complaint, then how the role of the forensic accountant becomes important. And then I'm going to briefly touch about the recent, the cyber attacks, the technology changes, and how the role of auditor is important, and consideration of laws and regulation. Because as Satish very beautifully explained in the beginning, the 5 principles which are enunciated in the Code of Ethics, that we need to be independent, we need to be unbiased, integrity. So those principles are very well articulated and driven from Code of Ethics. So the day we became a chartered accountant, I think those principles are very well, we are expected to follow otherwise in a normal life as well. So if you remember the recent Code of Ethics, the NOCLA provision, which is your consideration of laws and regulation, they have become applicable. So they have become applicable from April 2022. So deferred twice. So now the revised ones are applicable from this year onwards. Just to brief this thing, when Tarunji read my profile, so I just thought it's the right forum to, even share about my recent publication. So this is my co-authored publication, and the forensic investigation and fraud reporting in India. And whatever Satishi has explained, I was just trying to, correlate whether this book covers all. The answer which came to me in most of the cases, the answer is yes. This book is, thinking about the forensic investigation and fraud reporting in India. It is very, we actually spent a lot of time in understanding and doing a market research and to see what is the requirement of the profession. So this book is not just for the statutory auditors or for the forensic professional. It is actually for a wide range of stakeholders. So it is even for the directors. It is covering even every type of stakeholder, be it board of directors, be it your forensic accountant, be your statutory auditor, internal auditor. It covers a variety of case studies. So there are more than 100 case studies which are covered in this publication. And this the next 2 slides just gives you an overview of the content. So if you look at the content, Satish mentioned about the white collar crime, ethics and integrity. I think those are the underlying fundamental principle. Then we have a definition of fraud. How do we understand fraud under various governance regulation? And what are the responsibilities? So who is responsible for prevention, detection of fraud? So I think it is very important to understand who is actually responsible. So primary responsibility, is it that of the auditor? So the answer is no. The primary responsibility lies with the management. Now management could be your board of directors, could be your CEO, CFO, and therein we have just kind of bifurcated into different chapters. And it also talks about the role of a statutory auditor, which I'm going to cover in my presentation. And there are expert speak section as well, just to take perspective and experiences of the different expert. So, and also in one of the chapter, we have covered about audit versus forensic investigation. I think this is something, everyone asks, what is the difference between the two, and how far, in which situation the auditor is responsible. And as I mentioned, there are a number of case studies, and there is the illustrative reporting as well at the end of the book. So that's just about the book. As I mentioned, that there's more than 100 case studies, expert insights from each of the key stakeholders. So I would encourage those of you who are interested, you can visit. It's available on Amazon, TechSutra, and in many of the with the book vendors as well. Now with this, I'll just move to the recent updates and regulatory trends. So if I talk about especially in this remote working scenario, and if I just go back right in the first year when we started learning, how do we do remote audits, how we do remote work actually, not just audits. So the top 5 fraud schemes which have been, currently observed due to coronavirus. So, this slide shows you that, there were 83% overall increase in case of cyber fraud. And unemployment fraud was 73%, and fraud by vendors and sellers was 69%. Payment fraud was 68%. Identity theft was 67%. All this, so this has been taken from ACFE report. However, if you see, the emerging theme which is coming out is to understand the fraud due to technology, due to increasing use of technology. Everyone has learned, working remotely. People have started, working. Even the first year, I remember there were a lot of sessions and seminars organized by so many study circles on the remote audits, on the COVID-19. Acae also issued many of the publication. But if I look on the flip side, there is an increase in fraud because of this, because of this COVID-19 and because of this remote working environment. This slide just sets a tone as to, the recent media articles. So, for example, there were some deals which are under SFIO scanner, ED arrest 4 of Chennai firm, and IT department conducts unaccounted transactions. So, these are some of the news articles which you keep on reading. I'm sure many of you would have already noted. So these just, talks about why, how it is important to, and why these investigations happen. So, so in many of the situations, the regulators may order an investigation. In many of the cases, there could be a whistleblower complaint, but ultimately the regulatory focus is, or the regulatory, kind of oversight is increasing day by day on this subject. Now, first, I'll talk about the, the requirement in the LODR regulation, SEBI listing regulation. So these regulations are applicable to the listed entities, as well as in many cases, these are even applicable to the material subsidiary of listed entities. So those of you who audit the listed entities or do otherwise engaging with the listed entities or through their subsidiaries, you should be aware of these regulations. So Regulation 30 of the SEBI listing regulation requires that every listed entity shall make disclosure of the fraud defaults by promoter or key managerial personnel or by listed entity or arrest of key managerial personnel or promoter. Now, this responsibility is on the company. So Schedule 3, Part A of the LODR regulation requires company to immediately make such disclosure, as well as if there is any fraud or default by the directors other than the KMP or employees of listed entity. So these two regulations cast a responsibility on the management of the company to inform it to the stock exchange. And then there was a forensic audit which was introduced in October 2020. So what is forensic audit? So the terminology they are using here is forensic audit. So so here they mentioned about that, from October 2020 onwards, if any forensic audit has been initiated, irrespective of the name. So the regulation clarified that whatever name you call, if any such investigation have been initiated, the following disclosure shall be made to the stock exchange by the listed entities. That the fact that the forensic audit has been initiated, along with name of entity initiating the audit and reasons for the same. So which the details have to be given, and the final forensic report, other than forensic audit initiated by regulatory or enforcement agencies, on received by the listed entity, along with comments of the management. So here again, the regulator wanted to know that even if the management is doing any investigation, any forensic audit, by whatever name called, and which has not been ordered by any regulator or by any enforcement agency, so which means that has not been initiated by SEBI or let's say by RBI or by any other regulator, if there is any such forensic audit other than that, that should also be disclosed to the stock exchange. So, so this is something which was introduced in October 2020 for disclosure of forensic audit. And if I move a little further, they have also amended Regulation 30, and wherein they have also mentioned about the listed entities are required to disclose the material information event. So, and if event is material to the listed parent company, then the subsidiary will have to disclose to the parent for further compliance. Clause A gives you a list wherein it is deemed to be material. And in one of the clause, it has been given that frauds are very much covered. So that has to be disclosed to the stock exchange. And another regulatory change which happened in May 2021. So I think many of you would have read about the climate change and the business responsibility reporting that has been replaced by the business responsibility and sustainability report. And that is mandatorily applicable to the top 1,000 listed companies with effect from financial year 22-23. So currently this is voluntary. applicable, but next year onwards, this is mandatory. And if I move to the next slide, you will see that why I'm, reference of this BRSR reporting is relevant in this when we are discussing fraud reporting, or the, the role of the increased focus of the regulator on fraud reporting. So if you look at the key reporting requirement, this slide only captures the 4 important aspects like corruption, conflict of interest, anti-competition, cybersecurity. So with effect from 22-23, it is mandatory applicable to top 1,000 listed companies. Top 1,000 listed companies will have to submit this information to the to the stock exchange. So they will have to talk about what is the policy on corruption, share the web link, number of directors, KMP employees, workers against whom any disciplinary action was taken, details of any corrective action taken. Similarly, number of complaints received in relation to issues of conflict, details of corrective action taken or underway on any issue related to anti-competitive conduct. And similarly, the disclosure is also required for number of consumer complaints received in respect of data privacy and cybersecurity, including number of instances. So if you look at, again, the message is very clear. There is an increased focus on these disclosure. Even through the BRSR, the regulator is trying to, has asked the companies to share this information and has to share even the web link of the policies, relevant policies. So just to give you a gist of the, the regulatory environment. So there is a insider trading regulation as well. The amendment happened last year. So, they're very, which under the SEBI regulation. Cyber attacks have increased exponentially. So I mentioned about the increased in fraud due to the use of technology, due to the, due to remote working. I think that is something one needs to keep in mind. Manipulation of KPIs. So I think this is something important. So I can see, someone has raised a hand. So Prabhat, do you want to say anything?
Deepa, you can continue.
Okay, so I'll continue. Maybe questions I'll take at the end. So manipulation of KPIs to present better and expected picture. So I think this is something, one of the very important, which you generally, everyone used to call it as window dressing, or, kind of, for example, the overstatement of revenue, or maybe the understatement of revenue because of the current scenario, depending on how much should be recorded as revenue to show that because of COVID, how much is the impact on the financial position of the company. Inventory manipulation could be another area where there could be accounting fraud, recruitment fraud, dual employment. I think many of you would have heard about this dual employment, especially in this COVID times. So all these have kind of fraud the company, as well as when we are engaging with the company in whatever capacity, whether we are working as a forensic accountant, whether we are working as a statutory auditor, we should keep in mind and understand these these frauds, the work from home data theft. So this is something, again, very important. Many of the organizations have are not using Zoom, for example, or may not be using any other platform for some of their wherein they discuss the confidential information initially. So it depends. So there could be instances of data thefts, and therefore it's very important that the information is not getting leaked, and we need to see as an auditor that whether the controls are in place and there are no instances of data thefts, and if there is a risk, then that needs to be factored into when you are deciding on your audit procedures. And yes, we have super active regulators. We have just seen the SEBI regulation and the increased requirement. Now, I just moved to the the Audit and the Companies Act and role of auditor, and there it will answer the question as to what is the role of auditor. So this slide is just a reiteration that the standards in auditing have been notified under section 143.12. So you have your SA 240, which is part of these standards in auditing, which is on your fraud, risk assessment, and fraud auditors role in reporting of frauds. So audit is your independent examination of the financial information, and at the end of the conduct of the audit, the auditor is required to express an opinion. So again, audit is not an investigation into any alleged wrongdoing, and auditor is not even given powers of investigation. So for investigation power of search and seizure, you have to have a specific power, and that is not part of the framework or the statute or the requirements under the statute under section 143 of the when we talk about the role of auditor. True and fair view, I think all of us understand that ultimately true and fair view, the concept of true and fair view is very important, and the management has at the first hand has a responsibility for making sure that the for safeguarding of assets and preventing and detecting fraud and other irregularities, for establishing internal financial control. So when I talk about the internal financial controls, if you section 134, the board has to make an assertion that the internal financial controls are operating effectively, and the auditor's responsibility comes later when the auditor will have to issue an opinion on the operating effectiveness on the internal financial control. So this is just the management responsibility. Every auditing standard, if you look at the structure, they're very, very clear. First, what is the objective of the standard? And the second is, what is the management responsibility when we are talking about any of the standards? So even if I go to SA 240 on fraud, that talks about the management has a responsibility, first of all, to establish control, to make sure that each and every fraud which comes to their notice, they kind of, take appropriate action. And so is with the auditor. So, then comes the responsibility of the auditor. So, and they are responsible to provide the auditor with all the information. So if I take an example here, so for example, many questions I'm being asked on the whistleblower complaint. So in CARO 2020, you have seen there is a clause now that as an auditor, you will have to see all the whistleblower complaints received during the year. Now, as an auditor, if you are required to consider, see a whistleblower complaint, the list of those laundry list of the whistleblower complaint, if it's a listed company, I think you will not face a challenge because there is a vigil mechanism requirement. It is also mandatory for select listed company basis the threshold. But what about the private company or the smaller companies? For that, again, you will have to ask the management that, listen, there's a requirement. So please share all the whistleblower complaint received during the year. So again, the auditor cannot go and get those information without being shared by the management. So my suggestion will be to you, so when you are entering your engagement letters or signing your engagement letters, so have that clarity with the management, put it in writing that this is what is expected, that all the whistleblower complaint received during the year period under audit should be shared with the auditor. So now moving to the fraud reporting in an audit of financial statement. So fraud reporting, so what is fraud? I think, so that definition which you can see on the slide, it is as per SA 240. However, we have multiple statute or regulation, including a very wider definition under section 447 of the Companies Act. So fraud is an intentional act. So there has to be intention by one or more individuals, and mostly, if it's a well colluded fraud, or if there's a collusion, then it's very difficult for the auditor to detect fraud in the normal course of the audit. So, but if I look at the definition, it's an intentional act by one or more individuals among the management, those charged with governance, or employees or third parties involving the use of deception to obtain an unjust or illegal advantage. Which means I'll have to look at for these factors, and for that I'll have to see, for example, the related party transaction could be one just such area wherein there's a possibility of fraud, and therefore the auditor, we have a separate standard also wherein the auditor will have to spend a lot of time in making inquiries, looking at the transaction, looking at the movement of the transaction, and to understand the rationale or the economics, the business or the rationale behind such transactions. So as per SA 240, the primary responsibility remains with the management. The auditor is concerned about fraud that causes misstatement from fraudulent financial reporting and from misappropriation of asset. It is very important to understand that the responsibility of the auditor is to focus on those frauds that causes misstatement in the financial statement, and that could be because of fraudulent financial reporting, for example, overstatement of revenue, manipulation in inventory, or window dressing of financial statement, not recording a transaction, incorrect accounting treatment. So there could be a fraudulent financial reporting, or could be misappropriation of asset. For example, there is a asset, there is a, clearly there has to be a impairment provision being recorded, but the company is refusing to do any impairment assessment. The company is refusing to get a revaluation report. And as an auditor, we may be in a situation where there is actually a scope limitation. So the auditor will have to look at such instances and use his or her professional judgment. And if I look at this fraud triangle, this is something which is generally called, the fraud triangle. There has to be an incentive, perceived opportunity, and then there's to be a motive to rationalize the act. So individuals might possess an attitude, character, set of ethical values. So, and most of the cases, if you look at the various case studies, many of the times, the employees or the employees at a senior position or the management may be involved in such frauds, and there the role of the auditor becomes, more important, and as well as the role of the forensic accountant. So, so at the end, you can see some references. These are just references from the book if anyone wants to read in detail definition of fraud under relevant governance regulations. This slide gives you a overview of the various areas whenever you're conducting a financial statement audit, which are the areas which are more susceptible to fraud. Revenue recognition I have already covered. There is a presumption. So if you go to SA 240 also and look at the Appendix A there, the illustration that's also talks about there is a presumption that a risk of material misstatement due to fraud relating to revenue recognition exists. RPT is another area. So I'm sure many of you would have read the recent amendment made by the SEBI in the RPT regulation, wherein they have tried, they have revised the definition of related party transaction. The thresholds have been revised significantly to cover and to look at those transactions, to requiring additional approvals from the audit committee, from the board of directors. Accounting estimate. So estimate is another area where its judgment is involved. So, so the management will exercise a judgment and the auditor will have to test such judgment. So the auditor will also have to look at the accounting estimate. So this is another area which is key area of focus. And then you have significant unusual transactions. So here again, I'll give you an example. So for example, in CARO, if you remember, there is a clause on evergreening of loans. And now the auditor's rules have also been amended, which talks about whether company has given funds or received funds for passing on to any ultimate beneficiary. So company might be acting as an intermediary and it's there only to pass it on to the ultimate beneficiary. Similarly, you have an evergreening requirement reporting in CARO, wherein the auditor has to report that if you have given a loan and which is actually not repaid, but close to the repayment date, it is converted into a fresh loan, a new loan. With interest or without interest. So those are the new requirement which have been added in the auditor's reporting, wherein you see some sort of unusual transaction, some sort of such structuring of the transaction, the complex transaction, without understanding the rationale of such a extension, that has to be reported by the auditor now. And therefore, this is one such area wherein, the auditor should be considering when they're looking at areas susceptible to fraud. And then the control override. So management might override controls through various techniques. Example, fictitious journal entries. So again, fictitious journal entries. So if you remember the new rule, which has been, which is applicable from 1st April 2022 about the audit trail, that has been introduced by the MCA just to make sure that, there's an audit trail maintained for the journal entries. Sorry. So if anyone is making any changes in the journal entries, what is expected, the management also has to make sure that the audit trail is generated for such changes. And so the auditor also has to report in the auditor's report for year ending March 23, wherein they have to specifically make an assertion that they have seen the audit trail and audit trail was effective throughout the year. So, so again, these are some of the, kind of areas wherein you should be kind of focusing and be preparing, gearing up yourself when you are planning to issue your this year report as well as the next year report. And this slide talks about the procedure. So I'll not go into detail on the detailed procedure, but if you look at the procedures, so the expectation is when you're planning your audit procedures, at the time of planning, you test the appropriateness of general entries, including adjusting entries, review the accounting estimate, because this is one area which is susceptible to fraud, and also look at your unusual transaction, related party transaction. And for any unusual transaction, you need to question the management and whether the business rationale exists, or what could be the rationale behind such transactions. In COVID-19 pandemic, I think the question comes many times whether it increases the risk of material misstatement due to fraud. So the answer is yes. So fraud risk is generally linked to overstatement or your understatement of revenue. And if employees under financial pressure or unhappy with the entity, a remote working environment can create an opportunity for fraud because of the less direct supervision. So just be mindful of the fact that probably these situations would not have arisen in the normal scenario, but because of this remote working, or because of this, because in a few months the sales may be lower as compared to the other months. So for example, if we talk about now, in many of these sectors are still impacted. So if I talk about the airline sector, that could be still be impacted because of this third wave. So one should be careful about the number the management is reporting for the quarter, because they may want to kind of look at the impact. It is very important that controls around that should be tested to make sure to test the operating effectiveness of controls. Now I'm moving to another area, and I'll keep on, will request you to keep on writing your questions in the chat box. And with this, this is another requirement which is there under 2013 Act on the auditor. So 143.12 talks about that, for fraud, there's a wider definition in section 447. So here the reporting has to be made to the central government, wherein the auditor, while conducting or performing his duties, notices any fraud on the company by its officers or employees, and if that fraud has been identified by the auditor. Now, this guidance has been given in the guidance note if identified by the auditor. So if auditor is the first one to identify, and the suspected offense involving fraud is 1 crore or above, which is committed in the company by its officers or employees, the auditor is required to do such reporting to the central government. And this chart, which you can see, that is about the timelines, that if it is less than 1 crore, then the auditor in any case has to report to the board or the audit committee, and the board has to disclose each and every fraud in the board report. So that nature of fraud, parties involved, that has to be disclosed. So if it is less than 1 crore, it is not required to be reported to the central government. Where it is, if it is more than 1 crore, then it has to be reported to the central government as per the timelines given. So key considerations. So a very important point to note here, it is 143.12 reporting is it includes only fraud by officer and employees of the company, and it does not include fraud by third parties. While when I'll cover CARO, then this difference will be relevant because CARO is much wider now. An auditor to report if fraud identified in the course of performance of his duties as an auditor, an auditor has a reason to believe and has knowledge that a fraud has occurred or is occurring. So, and if management identified fraud is more than 1 crore, then even if, auditor is not the first one to identify, the auditor will still have to ask for the steps taken by the management and evaluate the reporting obligation under SA 240. So, which means irrespective of the fact that it may not require reporting under 143.12, it may have a reporting requirement under your SA 240. Now moving to reporting under CARO 2020. So CARO 2020 was issued in supersession of CARO 2016, deferred twice, and now it is applicable for your current year, which means year ending March 2022. And for the companies which has a calendar year ending, it will be applicable for your December 2022 financial year ending, because it is applicable for the financial year commencing on or after April 21. So earlier, it was required under clause 10, and now it is as per clause 11. So if you look at the additions, so the new reporting requirement is whether any fraud by or on the company, whether or not by its employer or officer. So these words are not there, but this is just to show you, the scope is much wider now. So whether any fraud by or on the company has been noticed or reported during the year, and if yes, the nature and amount involved is to be indicated. Then the second requirement, which has been added within this clause 11 only, it is whether any report under section 143.12 of the Companies Act has been filed by the auditor in prescribed form with the central government. And third one is whether the auditor has considered whistleblower complaint, if any, received by the company during the year. So if I just move to the next slide on fraud reporting. So they have removed the words by its officer or employees. So which means the responsibility of the auditor is much wider. So you will have to look at the frauds not only by the officer or employees, but even your third party fraud, even your vendor fraud. So the scope is much widened. And the use of the word noticed or reported indicates that the management of the company should have the knowledge about the frauds on the company or by the company that have occurred during the period covered by the auditor's report. So the management of the company should have knowledge, and the auditor should make inquiries from the management. And very important point again, auditor is concerned with fraudulent debt that causes a material misstatement in the financial statement. And the auditor will also have to consider the impact of other clauses. So for example, there is a whistleblower complaint for which the management has engaged with a forensic accountant to conduct the investigation. The auditor will also require to consider that status of investigation and the impact in this clause as well. Whether any fraud reporting has to be done in the clause, whether any qualifications to be included. Then you have the undisclosed income clause, wherein the company has made a voluntary surrender to the income tax authorities. Then the auditor will have to see what are the reasons why the disclosure was not made in the earlier years. And quarterly returns filed with the bank's working capital limits. So if there is any discrepancy, the auditor will have to look at the reasons and to again see whether there is any reporting implication under this clause 11 of CARO 2020. So this is just a question which came up. I thought it will be interesting for you also to see this, whether reporting is triggered where investigation is in progress. So the guidance is very clear that the status is to be given. So as you will have to make inquiry from the management. You will have to look at the frauds which have been come to the knowledge of the management, and the auditor will have to actually report and state that the investigation is in progress. It may have an implication on the main audit report as well, depending on the the matter and the nature of the fraud. Now, this slide I've just included, I think, for the documentation. In the beginning, we were talking about, and Vivekji also mentioned, what is not documented is not done. So this is an extract from the ICA guide for the SMPs, small and mid-sized practitioner firms. So they have given this illustrative checklist. You can very well use it, amend it, and to make sure that whenever you are conducting inquiries of management and others regarding the risk of fraud, what type of questions you should ask, and what are their responses. So I think this kind of a checklist can be helpful whenever you are making those inquiries, and should be documented in your working paper file. Now, this slide is just on the requirement under the various regulations. So I mentioned in the beginning many times that the responsibility for prevention, detection, and reporting of fraud is first of the management. So some of the regulations, just for your knowledge. So for example, the RBI, I think if many of you would have been doing bank audit, or if one of you is doing a bank audit, so there's a master direction on fraud, classification and reporting by commercial bank and select financial institutions. So there is a circular which requires reporting, specific reporting on fraud, and the SEBI LODR regulation I've already covered. So a specific focus is there, and herein in the regulation, the responsibility is cast on the management of the company. So this is again, this is with reference to the book again. But if you just draw the framework, so there is a specific responsibility for the CEO, CFO on the prevention, detection of fraud. There's a specific responsibility on the board of directors. So I mentioned about section 134. Each and every fraud has to be kind of included in the board report. The board has to include the nature of the fraud, the amounts involved, and the specific management responsibility cast under the Companies Act when they talk about the implementation of the internal control system and the role of internal auditors. This slide is just on the key ICA resources, so you can refer to this Practitioner's Guide to Audit of Small Entities, which has plenty of formats which can be used wherever required. And then you have the guidance note on fraud reporting under section 143.12, the CARO 2020, and the various implementation guides. Now, after the role of auditor and the fraud reporting, wherein I have covered the CARO as well. Now, let's talk about a bit on forensic investigation, and is it a substitute or supplement to audit? So, so this slide is again, you would have heard that in many of the cases, the regulators would have ordered a forensic audit on allegation of mismanagement and financial irregularities. So these press articles, again, taken from media only. So, the regulators from time to time keeps on ordering the forensic audit, investigation, on receipt of the complaint, on suo moto, or any such, whenever any such information comes into public domain. So, so if I just talk about, is auditor, or just to answer the question, is auditor responsible to make even the forensic investigation? So the answer is clearly no. So, so auditor. So if we talk about, if we just draw a historic, a chart, a kind of a chart, right, from going into the history, if we talk about the statement made in 1896 that auditor is a watchdog and not a bloodhound. So auditor is not bound to be detective or to approach his work with suspicion. And if we move to the emerging regulatory expectation starting from 2002, there was an RBI circular which requires an auditor performing internal, external, or institutional audit of a bank to refer to RBI if he finds anything susceptible to fraud or fraudulent activity or act of excess power or smell any foul play in any of the transaction. So any deliberate failure to do the same would render the auditor liable to action. So again, it was kind of onerous. Any deliberate failure, but if moved to the gradually the evolution of the auditing standard. So SA 240 was issued in 2009, and therein the responsibilities was given in a very detailed and wider manner. In fact, recently, or maybe the last year, you can go to the IAASB and check the website. IAASB has issued a discussion paper on the fraud and going concern in an audit of financial statement, which addresses issues and challenges related to fraud and going concern in audits of financial statement to respond to the various questions raised regarding the role of auditor. So IAASB has issued this discussion paper. Those of you are interested may read it, and even the comments which were received on the discussion paper, they have uploaded on the website. And the primary objective of the IAASB, the International Auditing and Assurance Standard Board, they are looking at the responsibility of the auditor regarding non-material fraud in a financial statement and what additional procedures could be appropriate. So they are trying to, kind of make that emphasis on material fraud, non-material fraud, and how an auditor is responsible for detecting and reporting fraud. So that is one of the discussion paper. And then in 2014, the 143.12 reporting to the central government was introduced. And in 2015, CARO was revised, which was very similar to now what you have in 2020. So fraud on or by the company noticed or reported during the year. In 2016, they added the word officers or employees, which was similar to section 143.12. And 2016, they issued a guidance note. 2020, they again revised the CARO and restated what was here in 2015. 2020, SEBI issued the disclosure requirement for initiation of forensic audit for companies. And 2021, we have now the Digital Accounting Assurance Boards of the ICA has issued 20 forensic accounting and investigation standards, which Satish will cover, in some time. The date of applicability yet to be announced by the ICA. And this is just a snapshot of the regulatory expectations outside India. So Institute of Internal Auditor has also issued a guidance on fraud, which is for the internal auditors. And there's a PCOB auditing standard, wherein SOX standard number 5, wherein the auditor is required to evaluate whether companies' controls sufficiently address identified risk of material misstatement due to fraud and controls intended to address a risk of management override. But if you go through these standards, the underlying principles are quite similar to what you see in your the Indian auditing standard. Now coming to the forensic investigation and whether it's supplement to statutory audit. So if I just go with the flow, so 143.12 requires auditor to report fraud if in the course of performance of his duties, he finds a reason to believe that fraud has been committed by its officers or employees. Now, an auditor may not be able to detect fraud unless its financial impact is reflected in the books of account. So for example, an employee is receiving payoff for favoring a specific vendor. Password of a key managerial personnel is stolen and misused to access confidential information. So there could be instances wherein the auditor cannot detect. Why? Because the auditor is auditing the books of account, looking at the financial statement, and is kind of looking at the suspicious, probably the general entries, the adjustment made in the financial statement. So therefore, auditor cannot be play the role of the forensic investigation. Now, if I just move to how does forensic expert involved? So forensic investigation usually relate to an issue defined by the client. So so if there is a matter which requires a forensic investigation, so whether or not appearing directly in the financial investigation, then forensic investigation and the forensic accountant role becomes important, and they use specialized methods which the auditors does not use. So specialized method used to investigate include data mining, digital forensic analysis. So in the book which I mentioned in the beginning, chapters 11 to 13 covers in detail about the forensic investigation, evaluation types, methodology, and approach. And I'm sure Satishi will also give you insights on this. So it is very important to understand that the role is not interchangeable. So if you are the statutory auditor and in your engagement letter, you have agreed to issue an opinion on the financial statement, you cannot automatically, start playing the role of a forensic auditor, because that requires a different skill set. But yeah, there is an increased focus, there is a huge demand, and therefore it is important to understand, what is the difference between the two. So if I just look at the slide, this gives you a overall difference, overall understanding. So audit, you are just looking at the financial statement, books of account, records registered to see if there was any material misstatement. Whereas forensic investigation, you will do with an objective of detecting fraud. Is there any fraud? Determining extent of damage. And Satish did mention in the beginning that it could be even used for gathering evidence for use in a court of law. Here you have a specific format as per SA 700 and with your 143.3 with your additional rules coming in. Whereas if I go here, there is no standard format. However, this in most of the cases, this will be a fact-based document for use in a lawsuit litigation. Materiality threshold, yes, you have a materiality threshold here. So if you look at SA 240 or if you look at the CARO as well, there is a materiality principle which has been defined therein. Methods, you will design your procedures, you can use your analytics, data analytics, and your audit procedures. But if I go, they will do your entire computer forensic review, the field investigation interview. So which means you need here additional expertise and additional skill, and it has to be again as per the mandate defined by the management, or if ordered by a regulator as per the mandate given by the regulator. Documentation, in both the cases, documentation has to be there, but here the documentation, your audit working paper should be filed. That is the requirement under your SQC1 as well. You have to retain your audit documentation for a minimum period of 7 years. But if here I go, that could be likely to be an evidence in your litigation or civil proceedings. So it is therefore important to have the understanding, and just to this slide is just a illustrative example of what has been explained on the previous slide. So, for example, auditor notices that a capital procurement is at a significantly higher cost than what he has seen. So he asks for the document underlying the procurement. So if an internal auditor is engaging, so he will look around the documentation, number of quotation, whether approvals were obtained or not, approval matrix, he will see. Whereas if the management is engaging with a forensic expert, the forensic expert will do a forensic review of the bid document. They may perform the desktop search to check for market risk. Right. So there is a, kind of expertise involved, and, this just an instance to explain the difference between the two. And this slide just gives you an overall, snapshot of the standard 20 standard, which Sateshji mentioned, and he will cover. So I'm just skipping this, and now coming to the slide on fraud and the auditor, what to do when you find it. So with increased expectation, I think we have seen the regulatory expectation, and so some of the suggestions which you can keep in mind. So handle carefully any documents related to the issue, no writing, marking, or pen impression. So make copies and ensure safe custody of the relevant document. So these are something, so some of the key points which you can keep in mind. And one of the most important point is consider reporting to the management board and audit committee. I think this is something very important which an auditor should keep in mind. So any issue you notice, first of all, you should intimate this to in writing to the management, ask for the response in writing from them. And if you believe that expert is required, you should have a discussion with the management. And on the on the other side, for example, as I mentioned in the beginning, you should look at the general entries. You should look at the related parties. You should look at the any such movement like recurring negative cash flows from operation while reporting earnings and earnings growth, addition to assets while competitors are reducing capital. So any such unusual transaction movement, you should have a focus, and each such suspicious transaction, any such instances should be reported to the management. Now, after this, I'll just now move to the cyber attacks, cybercrime, and role of auditor. So with fast changing technologies and the remote hybrid working model introduced across organization due to COVID-19 pandemic, the risk of cybercrime has been resulting into cyber fraud. So if you remember the first slide, wherein I mentioned about the percentages as taken from the ACFE, the percentage is increasing. And therefore, it is important for the auditor, be it external auditor or internal auditor, and management to understand the cyber risk giving rise to cyber fraud, cyber crime. Cybercrime could be your hacking. It could be any of your criminal act. Therefore, it is very important to understand what are cyber risk, what could be the security breaches. So the increasing use of technology, and especially the new tools in audit, like I mentioned about data analytics, that helps the auditor to to analyze large volume of structured and unstructured data related to the financial information of the entities. And when you carry out your ICFR testing or your testing of the IT general controls, so the auditor should have a increased focus on assessing the process for granting, changing, and deleting access to the IT environment, assessing the process for periodically validating the appropriateness of the user access. So just test the ITGC controls very carefully. And in performing a financial statement audit, the auditor may perform risk assessment procedure that are sufficient to provide a reasonable basis for identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement due to fraud or error. So again, the audit procedure should factor in the technology risk and the increasing risk due to cyber crimes, the increasing risk due to remote working, and the procedure should be designed to understand the what could be the possible risk for an organization, including phishing and other social engineering methods. The auditor needs to balance the nature and extent of the ITGC procedure with the level of assurance obtained from those procedures, and focuses procedures on the more likely issues in the entity's process related to, for example, the program change, access rights, segregation of duties for IT personnel, and operational scheduling and monitoring when these activities are controlled by the IT department. Now, after this, before I, hand over the session back to Satish, I'll take over the last, section of this presentation on consideration of laws and regulation. So we spoke about SA240, we spoke about fraud reporting under 143.12 in CARO, and we have this SA250, which is consideration of laws and regulation. Now, if there's a non-compliance with the laws and regulation, the auditor will have to look at whether it has a direct or indirect impact on the financial statement. And if there's a direct or indirect impact, the auditor will have to look at the compliance with the provision of laws and regulation. What could be the possible penalty? What is the reason for non-compliance? Whether it may have an effect on the going concern of the entity. For example, if the conditions for grant of the license for running the operations of the entity are not being complied with, now that could be an issue, that could be a non-compliance with the laws and regulation. So the auditor's responsibility is limited to undertaking specified procedures to help identify non-compliance with those laws and regulation that may have a material effect on the financial statement. So this is SA 250 was already there. So, but ICAI Code of Ethics introduced new requirements in OCNAR, and they have introduced entire section 360 for members in practice and section 260 for members in employment. That is applicable only to the listed entities and will be applicable with effect from 1st April 2022. So you should refer to the obligations of the auditor for reporting, the non-compliance with laws and regulation applicable to the entity. So the auditor should have an understanding of the entity, which are the laws and regulation which are applicable to the entity. The auditor should discuss the matter with the management as well as with the audit committee. Whenever you do your discussion, whether through a meeting, by meeting them and make a well maintained in your file. So though this is not part of the agenda, but I would just like to bring to your notice. So the reports even by the regulator, which are there in the AQR reports issued by the NAFRA, which are in public domain. So if you see, one of the important points which is covered is the auditor is not engaging with the management, the audit committee. So if you remember, there is the auditing standard SA 260, which requires the auditor to raise the red flags to the management. So if you have any such, you notice any non-compliance, you notice any suspected fraud, you notice any such unusual transaction, you need to have a communication with the management or the board of directors or the audit committee, or even if it's a smaller company, with the promoters, with the directors, intimate to them in writing about the suspected non-compliances. And in case, the non-compliance may be material to the financial statement and the management is not taking appropriate action, the standard even permits the auditor to consider the need to obtain a legal advice. And definitely the impact of such non-compliances needs to be taken into account when you are issuing an audit report. So as I covered in the auditor's section, ultimately the auditor has to issue a true and fair view, the opinion, and which is relied by a wide variety of stakeholders, be it your directors, be it the management, be it your investors, be it the regulators. So if a non-compliance has a material effect, in many cases, depending on the matter, you would have issued a qualified opinion or adverse opinion. If there is a scope limitation, so for example, you believe that the investigation is required to be conducted because of a suspected fraud, you are not able to obtain sufficient evidence, look at the supporting documents, get able to make an inquiry from the respective employees, then there could be a scope limitation, and in which case, again, you may have to show qualification or disclaimer of opinion. And most importantly, the regulatory reporting. So I mentioned about the reporting requirements, under RBI, by the RBI. So in many cases, any case of fraud has to be reported to the RBI as per the RBI circular. You may have to report to the MCA or the central government, actually, under section 143.12. So just keep yourself aware about the regulatory reporting requirement whenever any such fraud is noticed by the auditor. And if auditor is unable to determine whether non-compliance has occurred because of the limitation imposed by circumstances rather than by the management or those charged with governance, then the evaluation has to be made on the audit opinion. So again, if it's a scope limitation, then you may have to issue a disclaimer of opinion. So that was all from my side on the slide deck. And now I'll just, hand over the screen back to to Satishi to take us through the remaining section.
Yes. Deepa, there are a couple of questions which
Sure.
have come up. So would you like to take them right away?
Yeah.
It would be good. Sakina Imamia is asking if you can share the name of publication of case studies which you would recommend to read. If any case studies, of course, there are case studies in your book as well. I reviewed them, so I'm aware of it, but you can.
Yeah, you have given a review. Yeah, so thanks to you. So I missed mentioning Satish, she has given a wonderful review. It's there on LinkedIn as well, and it's published in the Bombay Chartered Accountants General. So I'll share the details here.
That's it. But okay, so is there any other book you could recommend on case studies? If you're aware of, you could probably share it later as well.
Sure.
So that was question number one. Prashant More is asking about regulatory standards for conducting forensic investigation. Is it required to be done by licensed forensic auditors who possess relevant qualification? Is it internal, external, or any agency is issuing these licenses? And are forensic agencies required to get licenses from any government agency?
So I think basis my understanding, there is no such license, but yeah, expertise has to be there, as you mentioned in the beginning.
Yes,
so
yes.
You may want to do additional, courses, but chartered accountant can also be a forensic accountant.
Yes, so, and of course, with the standards applying only to chartered accountant as of now, but the institute has also urged different regulatory bodies also to make these standards applicable to their profession as well. But to answer the question very straight, yes, as of now, there is no such licensed forensic auditors, but the CA qualification, of course, is the one that will be good enough. And of course, more important than the qualification is one aspect, but I guess the ability to dig deep, to really be able to collaborate different evidences, to get something out of the evidence does require special skill. And I also talked about the behavioral skills. He has one more question saying that taking into consideration digital frauds, which may take place, say, from an international or a foreign location, is there any need or is there any requirement to follow international standards, if any, in forensic investigation in such cases?
So I think, again, the answer is no, because ICAI being the first body who have issued the standards. So I think if you look at the ICAI standards and the methodology, I think I'm sure that the book will help you, wherein you have chapters looking at the methodology. Plus, there are a couple of other books also, which talks about methodology that can be referred to by you.
Yes. And Surendra Nagarajan is asking, is internal auditor responsible for fraud? Responsible to detect fraud, obviously, not for fraud, but to detect fraud.
Yeah, so I know. So yes, internal auditor. So to give you a couple of examples, so you have your standards on internal auditor, which talks about fraud detection. Section 138 of Companies Act also requires the management company to have an internal audit. And the mandate is also, that is first of all to have the detection of fraud. So they are responsible for prevention and detection of fraud. And you may also refer to, SA 610 using the work of internal auditor, which even requires the statutory auditor to make such inquiries. So statutory auditors may even choose to. So when you will report in CARO now in 2022, you also have to report whether you have considered the report of internal auditor. And therein you will have to make a specific inquiry whether any fraud was noticed during the year. Look at the internal auditor report, whether any fraud was reported to the management or the audit committee.
Yeah. There are a couple of people who have raised their hands. So Tarun Bhai, Vivek ji, I don't know how to handle that. Could you?
Yeah.
There is Suprabhat Bhattacharya and Brajesh Kumar.
Yeah, I'll help in that.
Yeah, please.
Suprabhat ji, you can speak. In the meantime, there's a question to Deepa. Deepa, if there is a non-listed company and the management themselves detects a fraud, So what will be the responsibility of an auditor? Because as per the guidance note, the auditor is not required to do anything as per the guidance note on fraud reporting. So if you can just touch on that. And if it is a listed company, then what will be the responsibility? You said about the latest amendment in October 2020 about the fraud reporting. So if a forensic audit is done by a statutory authority, that's a different thing. If the management suo moto determines or does a fraud risk assessment, and thereby extends that to fraud, what is the responsibility? If you can enlighten on that.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. Thanks for the question. So, see, I think first of all, let's take the unlisted company. So I'll clarify. For the unlisted company, the SEBI regulations are not applicable. Guidance note only deals with 143.12 reporting, which is the reporting to the central government in case the amount is exceeding 1 crore and if the fraud is identified by the auditor. SA 240 is applicable to all the companies or even to the non-companies. So even if you have let's say you have a non-entity, you will have to look at the SA 240. That requires the auditor to make the fraud risk assessment and evaluate the impact on reporting. You will have to make inquiries from the management. You have to look at the steps taken by the management. So if that's an important area wherein you believe that could have an impact on the financial statement, material impact, to make such inquiries, and you have a responsibility. You can't say that, look, I have not identified, this is not our reporting to under 143.12. And with the CARO, your reporting becomes much wider. You have to make an assertion whether there was any fraud on or by the company, which covers every fraud. Every material fraud is covered now, which the auditor will have to consider and make an assertion in the audit report. So that is for, yeah.
But in that case, suppose a fraud is detected by the management, and the management obviously suo moto discusses in the audit committee per se and closes the matter. Suppose if employee X has done a fraud of say 10 CR and the management recovers the money from the employee and closes the matter. So as an auditor, because the management itself had detected it, as an auditor, we are not required to report to central government per se because it was already detected by the management.
Sure.
So therefore, there is no reporting by the auditor and there is no reporting by the management also to central government under any law.
Right.
So in that case, what will be the reporting in the CARO? Okay. Well, in CARO, the reporting is perspective of the reporting done by the management or by the auditor to central government, I said, as per the CARO 2020 reporting.
Okay. So if I just talk about CARO for a minute here, only CARO, in this case also, for the 10 crore, I'll have to first of all ask the management, look at if the steps taken by the management correct. If I'm satisfied, all what they have done, they have recovered, they have fired the employee, they have included a note in the financial statement, I may not include anything in CARO also, because CARO I have to see the fraud, or I may include factually that, if you look at the illustrative wording given in CARO also, that, there was a misappropriation of the, let's say, of the financial assets or any fraud by the employee, and the company has taken appropriate steps. So that is one example, and even which is, you can find it many places. The CARO reporting will still be there, whereas your main audit report may not be qualified for this. So in this case, you still have a CARO reporting, because CARO covers not only 143.12, it even covers fraud on or by the company, all types of fraud.
Just to extend deeper to that, suppose any scheme comes of Vivad Se Vishwas and management suo moto goes and says, I have not disclosed income of rupees so much. So whether it is a fraud by the management against the company.
Interesting. But I still have to make that, I still have to make that reporting in CARO in my undisclosed income clause, right? And I still have to question the management why it was not disclosed earlier and why now. So what is the intent, and I'll have to see. So that is a very high level guidance given in the guidance note, but I definitely will have to look at the intent of the management making such disclosures.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And the second question about the SEBI reporting, again, it is suo moto. So as per the SEBI requirement from October 2020, if a management does a fraud reporting, or what we were discussing while drafting the guidance note about the pre-audit or pre-forensic. So if a management suo moto says ki tomorrow, if a forensic audit comes to me, what are the loopholes which we have to understand that gap? They do a pre-forensic. In them, they ask for a forensic auditor, please come and see whether everything is perfect. If any forensic happens to my company, whether anything will come out or not. So that we call pre-forensic. If management does that in a listed company, whether any reporting requirement will be there under the new guidelines of SEBI.
Yeah. So even if they are doing some investigation to see everything is fine on any area, so let's say I want to do a check on my purchase or procurement, that I have to intimate to the stock exchange. So if you look at the wordings, regulation 30, that talks about initiation of the forensic audit, whatever name you call it. And if that has not been ordered by any regulator, which means the management has ordered this, and then that has to be, kind of reported to the stock exchange. And you will also have to talk about the final forensic audit report once it's available with the management. That is the entire intent, of bringing this clause.
And what about substance over form? The management wants a forensic audit, but to do away with this reporting, they say it's a compliance audit or process audit, something like that. And if there is a fraud determined in that process audit report or internal audit report per se.
Yeah, so I think that's where we are, right? So probably this is expected from the management as well to look at substance over form. But if they are calling it as compliance audit and later on calling it as fraud, and I think that's probably could be an issue,
Because nowadays, let's be practical, it is very forensic being a new term. Many promoter-driven company or many companies, they want to have an understanding of the forensic. And they say that they call a consultant, do a fraud risk assessment per se. A third party comes and does a fraud risk assessment. And then if anything is seen in that, it becomes a forensic accounting. And in that, they call it as a management audit because they want to do away with this compliance and all. So they call it a management audit, they call it an internal audit, they call it a compliance audit, but it is actually a forensic audit to determine the quantum of the fraud.
Yeah.
So thereby, what will be the role of the auditor if the management is not doing this SEBI disclosure or anything as such?
See, I think auditor cannot say anything if they're calling it as a management audit. It is a responsibility of the management. All they can ask is to ask for the report. And if there is a report which indicates the fraud, then the investigation may have to be ordered or look at the report which has been actually obtained. And then I have to see implications on my audit report. I cannot tell, tomorrow and tell to the stock exchange. I mean, this again depends. You may have to look at the confidentiality clause. You may have to take a legal advice also. I can't just simply say that, okay, company has not reported. Now I'll tell the stock exchange that the company has not reported, right? This could be an ethical issue. Probably discussion should be held with the management. But yeah, reporting implication is on with me. So if fraud is detected, I'll have to look at the report.
I think this discussion between Deepa and me will give an eye opener to many people to understand that this is a general, actually it's a practical problem.
Sure.
Being in the assurance shoe, it becomes very difficult for us where to deviate, where not to deviate, because management will say it's not a forensic audit. So management wants to say it's a process audit or something like that, and they don't want to report it. So it's a very conscious call we as assurance people have to take for that. Correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. In the meantime, anyone having any question?
Yeah, Suprabhat had.
Yeah, Suprabhat ji or Brajesh ji, you can unmute yourself and ask your question if any. Brajesh ji.
जी सर. सर, गुड इवनिंग टू ऑल ऑफ यू. सर, हम सब का जो फर्म है, जैसे हम सब 135 पार्टिसिपेंट्स अभी हैं, हमारा फर्म चलता है आर्टिकल के बेस पे और लैक ऑफ टाइम के बेस पे. ठीक है. आर्टिकल जो है वो सीए इंटर, सीए फाइनल पास, जब वो सीखता है फाइनल में पास होके. मेरी आवाज आ रही है सर?
हाँ बिल्कुल आ रही है.
जब वो सीख जाता है तब वो चला जाता है. ट्रेनिंग टाइम पे हमारे यहाँ रहता है. अब उसके भरोसे हम ऑडिट करते हैं. ऑडिट करके फाइनलाइजेशन का काम अपने करते हैं. स्टैंडर्ड ऑन ऑडिटिंग, अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड दिन पे दिन बढ़े जा रहे हैं. अभी जो अपना फ्रॉड रिपोर्टिंग है, अपने फ्रॉड रिपोर्टिंग के लिए रिस्पॉन्सिबल ठहराए जा रहे हैं. आप एक फॉर्म में डाल दिए कि इसको ऑडिटर रिपोर्ट करेगा. अगर कोई ऑफिशियल फ्रॉड करता है, अगर उसका मैनेजमेंट 365 दिन सर पे बैठ के नहीं पकड़ पाया, तो 5-7 दिन के ऑडिट में मेरा आर्टिकल क्या और 2 दिन के विजिट में मैं क्या पकड़ लूंगा. नंबर 1. नंबर 2, अगर सर ये इतना इजी होता तो आज सत्यम का स्कैम, विजय माल्या, नीरव मोदी, ये सब नहीं हुआ होता. अब ऑडिटर को सब जिम्मेदार ठहराने के लिए एक दिन पे दिन जिम्मेदारी बढ़ाए चले जा रहे हैं. हर सेक्टर में देखिए, अभी इनकम टैक्स वाला बुला के भी पूछ लेता है, कंपनी वाला बुला के भी पूछ लेता है. तो ये ऑडिटर, जैसे आप लोगों ने जो बताया, ऐसे में ये लिखा है, अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड में ये लिखा है, अपने सेगमेंट रिपोर्टिंग कितने सालों से कर रहे हैं, रिलेटेड पार्टी रिपोर्टिंग कर रहे हैं, रेशियो एनालिसिस करके दे रहे हैं, उसके बाद भी तो फ्रॉड आ रहा है। तो इसमें मेरे हिसाब से सर ऐसा कुछ होना चाहिए कि जो आदमी डे टू डे वहां के ऑडिट में इन्वॉल्व है उस पर रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ज्यादा हो, बजाय कि स्टैट्यूटरी ऑडिटर जो 5-7 दिन में ऑडिट करता है, अपने 60 टैक्स ऑडिट करते हैं, अपने कंपनी ऑडिट करते हैं, उसमें टाइम बाउंड प्रोग्राम है, जिसका आपका लिस्टेड कंपनी उनका और पहले भी ऑडिट करके देना होता है। तो स्टैट्यूटरी ऑडिट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से ये जो फ्रॉड रिपोर्टिंग है, ये तो एक्स्ट्रा बर्डन है जो चार्टर्ड को बहुत टेंशन में डालता है कि कहीं मुझसे कुछ छूट तो नहीं गया, कहीं मेरा आर्टिकल कुछ देख के तो नहीं आया। या तो इसके लिए फिर अब ये सिस्टम होना चाहिए कि आर्टिकल से ऑडिट नहीं करा के, जब बच्चा सीए पास हो जाता है उसके बाद 3 साल ट्रेनिंग करे आपके चार्टर्ड के पास, उसको हम सिखाते हैं, ऑडिट में भेजते हैं, जब वो सीख जाता है तो कहीं और चला जाता है। तो इस तरह से इस प्रैक्टिकल डिफिकल्टी का आप जो बता रहे हैं वो सब ठीक है, लेकिन ये प्रैक्टिकल डिफिकल्टी जो है इसको हम लोग कोप अप कैसे करेंगे, हम लोग इसको डील कैसे करें? हमारा तो ऑफिस ऐसे ही रहेगा हमेशा, आर्टिकल आएंगे आर्टिकल जाएंगे, तो उस ढंग से हम लोग कैसे इसको डील कर सकते हैं सर? ये मेरा एक तो अपना कंसर्न था, इसमें अपना ना कंप्लेन है ना कुछ है, ये कंसर्न है। अगर ये सब कुछ ठीक रहा होता, जैसे बैंक ऑडिट हम लोग 3 दिन में बैंक ऑडिट करके देते थे, अप्रैल से सब लोग खुश हो जाते थे कि हमारे पास बैंक ऑडिट आ गया, 3 दिन ऑडिट कर दो, इतना का फीस बन गया। आज हालत क्या है कि बैंक ऑडिट खत्म ही हो गई लगभग। जो बैंक ऑडिट हाथ में था, जो एक रेवेन्यू का सोर्स था, आज सब बैंक देखिए एनपीए लेकर बैठा हुआ है, ऑडिटर के ऊपर विश्वास नहीं है। अल्टीमेटली क्या हो रहा है, ऑडिट के प्रोफेशन के प्रेस्टीज को बट्टा लग रहा है। ये इतना कंपल्सन अगर आप ऑडिटर पे डाल देंगे तो ऑडिटर एक ही तो ऑडिट करेगा तो पोसाएगा नहीं उसको। और अगर सब ऑडिट करेगा, इतना ध्यान से ऑडिट करेगा, हमको सबका फ्रॉड भी डिटेक्ट करके देना है, वो भी जो वहाँ के एम्प्लॉय हैं, जो वहाँ का, अगर मैनेजमेंट ही फ्रॉड कर रहा है तो क्या बताएगा आपको? और अगर एम्प्लॉय फ्रॉड कर रहा है, चाहे ऑफिसर फ्रॉड कर रहा है, उसके ऊपर मैनेजमेंट बैठ के साल भर में कुछ नहीं कर पाए तो अपने 7 दिन में 10 दिन में क्या कर लेंगे? इस तरह से थोड़ा गाइड करिए जिसको हम लोग प्रैक्टिकली, जो प्रैक्टिकली पॉसिबल हो, जिसको कोरिलेट किया जा सके। ऐसे देखिए ना बढ़ते जा रहा है, अभी यूएस गैप से मिला दे रहे हैं, हम लोग ग्लोबल होते जा रहे हैं। वहां का अभी एक भाई ने क्वेश्चन पूछा कि अगर कहीं बाहर से फ्रॉड हो रहा है तो हम लोग कैसे कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं? और हम लोगों से क्या उम्मीद किया जा रहा है कि हम लोग मतलब आईटी में भी एक्सपर्ट है, इनकम टैक्स में भी एक्सपर्ट है, कंपनीज लॉ में भी एक्सपर्ट है, जितना भी इंडिया में लॉ है सब में हम लोग एक्सपर्ट हैं। आप एमएसएमई का, वहां पे माइक्रो स्मॉल मीडियम, आज 50 क्वेश्चन का अपने टैक्स ऑडिट करने जा रहे हैं, उसमें आंसर देना है, तो कितना चीज अपने कवर कर सकेंगे? अपने भी तो अल्टीमेटली एक तो ऑफिस चला रहे हैं, एक तो कुछ तरीका तो होना ही चाहिए अपने लिए भी, कि हमने खाली हेल्थ रिस्पॉन्सिबल के लिए हम लोग पास करके आए हैं। हो गया सर मेरा।
Yeah. Deepa, you want to take it or want me to say something?
You can say, and I'll add. I mean, he has taken his heart out,
Yes,
for the profession. Yes.
Sujesh ji, आप जो बोल रहे हैं, this is definitely one of the points for pondering and definitely affecting the smaller firms, no doubt about it. लेकिन क्या है, see, this is a profession that we have entered into with full knowledge. We have done our practice. There are problems going to be there. These problems come not only for the CA profession, it comes, Vivek, Deepa and I were talking a little bit earlier. We were talking about this, that it comes for every profession. If I run a hospital management, there are so many things that can go wrong. You know, thousands of things can go wrong, right? From oxygen supply to water to food to medicines. A fake medicine could come in, be administered to the doctor. There are procedures that are there in the hospital, but not being followed on the ground, which can result in death of a person. See, remember, at least today we have got journal entries. We can pass some entries here and there and then rectify. So there are several professions. There are businesses like Ola, Uber. So many responsibilities can come onto the people. While that is there, I'm not trying to demine or bring down the problems that small CA firms and medium-sized CA firms face. All that I'm saying is, and in fact, there is a lot of talk also going on that smaller firms should start collaborating with each other, start becoming better, doing some benchmarking. Set of 5 or 6 firms should come together. And as you correctly said, we cannot know it all. We cannot know the Companies Act, Income Tax Act. We can We should know IT, we should know business, we should know SEBI regulations, we should know insurance regulations. And regulations are coming up day in and day out, and India seems to be a country where for everything we need regulation. If something has to be done, we require a law, we require a rule before which we do it. The point is taken. I think so long as we do our job in the best possible way, we do what we are intended, what we are required to do. And in cases which are being determined even in the court, if you can prove that you have used your professional judgment, I do agree with you. Unfortunately, you have to work only with article clerks who come and then move out of the firm. All those things are there. But then you need to benchmark yourself with other companies, with other firms who are doing better. How have they collaborated? How a set of small, this happens even in farming, it happens in every profession. The small firms will need to think of how to redo their own business sense, and probably, so you can't sleep with the problem and get up with a solution. This will require a little more strategic thinking on part of not only Brijesh Kumar Srivastav. It is an issue for the CA profession itself. And definitely, as the days go by, there are so many announcements coming of non-requirement of GST audit, not requirement of bank audits, and therefore the profession has to, there is not going to be any alternative but to reinvent itself. I'm sorry, that is the reality that is being faced by us. And earlier we realized these things. See, the law is not going to stop. The law is going to continue to put pressure on the people who are doing it. Of course, in auditing, there is a concept of a 3 lines of defense. Of course, in IIA, in the Institute of Internal Auditors also, I moved away from this concept. But auditors is the 3rd line of defense. The 1st line of defense is the management. The 2nd line of defense are the operating staff. And the 3rd line of defense is the auditors. So long as we can prove that we have done our job with due professional care, I think that will absolve us. There is no direct answer. This is whatever I said in the last 3 minutes or so is not an answer to your question. In fact, it raises more questions. That is my...
Just to compliment Satish ji, we started this session with saying only one line: audit not documented is audit not done. When we are issuing a report in SS 700 and we are saying that we have done our audit as per standards in audit, we should make sure that the basic standard compliance is done. We have to prove in the court of law that we have done audit as per standards in audit. If we are able to prove that, then whichever fraud may come, no one can touch our skin. And we have to make sure that we always talked about tax practitioner or tax specialist. We always talked about an indirect tax specialist. Now we have to have an assurance specialist. We have to have an audit specialist. We cannot say that by audit lijiye baki kaam milega. We have to say if you are doing audit, then you have to do as per standards on audit. And we have to make sure that we have the basic document. I'm not saying detailed document of 1,000 pages, but for say each standard, if you have 1 page and if my article fills that, and we have the basic evidence, we will be able to protect ourselves, our skin in the court of law.
Yeah, so there is a checklist also issued by the ICAI or the Committee for Members in Practice. So I think just to add to what Vivek and Satish mentioned, the documentation is something should be a point number 1. We should have a checklist for each and every standard. The second thing is you should have a documentation around the responsibility for the management. Please inquire the management. You send in writing whether you have noticed fraud. So if you are just concerned about the new reporting requirement, fraud is always a responsibility, fraud reporting. And, if anything comes to your notice under SA 240, now they are asking specifically for you to make a specific assertion and CARO. So for that, you should also understand what is the responsibility of the management under various regulations and make those inquiries. Let them respond to you in writing that these are the steps taken by them. You're also looking at internal controls and issuing an ICFR report. So if you're issuing an ICFR clean report, which means that the controls are fine. So I think as long as you're making those inquiries, you are maintaining your documentation, making those checklists as part of your working paper, I think that's the best which a chartered accountant can do within the purview and the framework of the ICAI standards.
And I'll also say that businesses are only going to get more and more complex. I think simple businesses and trying to do something very simple those days are gone. And Brajesh ji, if you ask me, your problem, which you have explained and alluded in such a beautiful manner, you think about if you're part of a big firm and you get an audit of to do of, say, the Aditya Birla Group or L&T or Reliance Retail, where the turnover itself is $60 billion and operating in, when salaries are paid, it is paid in 46 different currencies and operations are all over the world. Road work is being done, work is being done on bridges and underwater and undersea. So there is no boundaries for the material to come and material to go. And just think about all those internal controls and those kind of situations. And I think the things are, whether we like it or not, are becoming complex. And therefore, there isn't going to be ever a simple solution to these type of questions. And the more I think our profession becomes more solid by having more associations. I mean, with due respect to PwC and all the big four and Deloitte and KPMGs and all that, they have also consolidated themselves. They have the benefit of some world best practices. I think even at the CA level, even our Honorable Prime Minister had mentioned that he wants to see Indian firms, coming up, consolidating and giving a fight for the money for the best accountants in the world. And I guess we can do it if things, but that if you ask me whether it has answered your question, I think to an extent of philosophically it has. Practically we'll have to work it out. We'll have to go back to the drawing board and think about how to go about it. But yes, I do agree that we must do our work, we must document it, and once that is demonstrated, there is no power in the world that can go against us.
Anyone having any other question?
Now, there was one more question saying that the fees that we get is also not justified commensurate with the responsibility on the statutory auditors. I think this is a question that will require the entire weekend to answer. There is no straight answer, but yeah, accept jobs that makes meaning to you and you have the expertise to do it. That's all the questions as I could see it. Yeah, Deepa has also put in some links and other things. Yeah, fine. So can we move on with the agenda?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
sir.
Yeah, great. So good evening again, and Deepa, thank you for a very, very interesting session. You have really covered the whole works of all the technical aspects of the regulations that are there. And I'm sure that if we wake you up in the middle of the night, I think you will only start reading section after section, putting more and more responsibility on each one of us to do our day-to-day jobs. Well, so it was a very interesting presentation. It of course raises more questions. It raises more need for us to be a little more attuned with what is required to be done. And the expectations are not going to become less, as I said, and it's only going to increase in the days to come. So let me now talk about the expectations from forensic accountants. And when I talk about expectations from forensic accountants, I'm going to talk about all stakeholders, not only the client, but also the government, also the profession, and also our own expectation of what we have to do. So the standards, the compendium of the FAIS, Forensic Accounting and Investigation Standards, which was issued by the ICAI, is a fairly well detailed book. Not because I was part of the team I'm saying this, but not a very thick book to go through. Deepa's book, of course, runs into some 600 pages. Deepa and Sandeep Baldava's book, of course. But this is a compendium of what exactly is the things that we need to do as accountants. So I'll very quickly say in the next 45 minutes or so, 45 to 50 minutes, and I'm requesting again questions to come, because if you see in the last 20 minutes or so, we achieved so much in the discussion. Not that Deepa's talk was not interesting, but at least it brought, these questions brings out lots of things that are practically being faced by people who are actually doing the job. And I guess the seminars like this, the advantage will be more when we ourselves are asking these questions and we seek to directionally get answers. So again, my request is that you please continue to do this. Now, if I talk about standard 110, it talks about the nature of engagement. So the concept of the audit, the statutory audit, what is a statutory audit? What is an internal audit? What is the focus of the statutory audit? Obviously, it is undertaken to express an independent opinion about truth and fairness of the financial statements. Internal audits are designed to strengthen internal controls with a focus on systems and process improvements. So what is forensic accounting? So forensic accounting aims to highlight any accounting or legal violations, regulatory deviations, or contractual breaches through ascertainment of facts and discovery of evidence suitable for a court of law. And what is an investigation? The purpose of investigation is to examine facts and circumstances and discover evidence to prove or disprove hypotheses formulated regarding alleged legal violations, unethical conduct, or the possibility of a fraud by suspected individuals. It is important for us to understand the meaning of the word fraud risk, which is covered in standard 120. Okay. The typical characteristics of a fraud involve an incentive or pressure to commit fraud. Sometimes the management tells the employees, management of certain companies, I'm not saying all companies, but certain companies, to commit the fraud, that is to evade tax or to underplay revenue or to increase the revenue or show more profits, etc., for whatever purposes. A perceived opportunity to do so and some rationalization of the act. We of course we all know about the fraud triangle. And the fraud risk is therefore the concept of risk applied in a fraud scenario. And of understanding the fraud risk helps the professional to focus and prioritize the work on areas of importance with greater vulnerability to the fraud. The standard 130 talks about the laws and regulations, just as Deepa was telling us about all the laws and regulations. That is what there are so many rules and regulations depending upon the environment in which you are operating, whether it's an insurance company, a financial services company, whether it's a chemical company, whether it's a minerals and metal. Each of the industry in which we are operating has a certain ecosystem of rules and regulations, and it is important that we understand these laws to the extent that we can, and we cannot do away with not understanding the law. As Deepa rightly said, there are checklists that need to be drawn under all the applicable laws and regulations, and we should ensure that there is a system in the company to track all that is required. However, if there is any deviation, then we need to do a detailed audit on those aspects. There is something called the applying the hypothesis also, which I'll not talk too much about in the interest of time. I'll come down now to standard 210, which talks about the engagement objectives. Now, here is the indicative list of nature of engagement and possible objectives. In a forensic accounting services, the possible objectives which could come, the focus area is critical examination of transactions, funds, and balances in the books of accounts or with third parties. So the list of services that we can probably have, indicatively have, is financial statement manipulations. Has there been any manipulation of financial statements? Is there any funds diversion and therefore the need to do asset tracing? Is Is there any anti-money laundering that is happening? Is there any license fees, dues, or any tax evasion which has come about in the operations of the company? Is there any related party transactions and valuations? Deepa, of course, alluded to this a bit in her conversation. Is there any valuations or estimations of losses or damage which is not done in an appropriate manner? And of late, is there any suspicious transactions under the IBC? If I move into investigation services, then we would need to talk about fraud investigations, including cyber frauds. Is there any insurance or personal injury claims which have been falsely made? Is there any ethical or code of conduct violations, whistleblower complaints, or the prevention of sexual harassment allegations? And I guess the whistleblowing complaints is becoming a very important aspect of business operations. It's very important for the company to ensure that there is an appropriate methodology to handle whistleblower complaints. There are two extremes in my personal experience in the corporate life. I've seen two extreme sides of the pendulum so far as whistleblowing complaints are concerned. On one side of the pendulum are all frivolous complaints. Somebody is irritated with the boss, somebody is irritated or jealous with some colleague, and there is a whistleblowing complaint. Somebody is not happy with the increment that he got, or somebody thought that he deserved to get a promotion but didn't get it. He would make a whistleblowing complaint. So many times I've seen that the whistleblowing complaints are more of an HR requirement, and those technically do not come under a whistleblowing complaint. I'll just talk very briefly about a good whistleblowing complaint handling mechanism. There must be a hotline. There must be you should not encourage too much, but there must be an encouragement given to the employees, to the suppliers, to all the stakeholders to use the whistleblowing line for complaining for anything that has a genuine complaint. These complaints must first be taken to the committee. The committee must comprise of people within the organization and sometimes outside the organization as well, who could receive these complaints, go through the efficacy or the importance of these complaints, ensure that there is a need to actually investigate this complaints, and either the investigation can be done by an internal team, or we could hire some experts from outside. The company could hire experts from outside to really look at these whistleblowing complaints. There must be a timeline, a finite timeline. The whistleblower has to be his rights have to be taken care of, and he must be protected. In fact, there was a question also asked on the rights of a whistleblower. Yes, the whistleblower has to be properly protected under the law. So some of these things have to be taken into account while giving these investigation services. Litigation support services, and this could be a fact witness, an expert witness, an alternate dispute resolution. Many times the investigators are required to come up and be a fact witness or an expert witness. A fact witness is to establish the facts of the case. An expert witness is the one who gives an opinion on the particular aspect. The next standard 220, talks about the engagement, acceptance, and appointment. Many a times we think that the appointment of when we get an assignment, and we don't pay too much attention on the appointment letter or the engagement letter. My request to you is that you please make sure that there is a proper methodology that your firm follows while getting these engagements. There must be a proper procedure that needs to be followed when these engagements are taken. Also, when engagements are taken, we need to ensure that we have the appropriate skilled resources and ensure that we will complete the assignment within the time frame that is being envisaged. It's better to call these things out at the beginning rather than taking assignments, then realizing that we do not have the skilled resources and we are not in a position to complete the assignments on time. So make sure that we have all these skills. We know all the complexity of the relevant laws and regulations, as well as any constraints or scope limitations. And these need to be spelled out very clearly. So this is very, very important, because once we take the engagement, after that it is very difficult, or it is, I would say, impossible, or not a very professional thing to do, to say that the fees were not adequate and so on and so forth, or we don't have the skills to do so. So please make sure that these things are factored in very, very carefully while taking these assignments. So we should also be cognizant of the nature and the form of deliverables. What is exactly going to be our deliverables? What is it that the client is expecting from us? What is the expectation of the engaging authority, whoever the engaging authority may be? Is there going to be any limitation on the scope prior to the engagement acceptance? Are we going to have any limitation? Is there going to be any limitation? And these need to be spelled out very, very clearly while doing the while before taking up the assignment. There are a typical, the standard, if you go through the standard, and I don't want to repeat anything that is listed out very clearly in the standard, but there are some typical contents of an engagement letter, and I request you to please go through those provisions which are there in the standards, and make sure that each engagement letter has all those that are mentioned or as applicable in the standards. Then the use of the expert. Standard number 230 talks about using the work of an expert. Now, who is an expert? An expert is an individual or a person representing an entity possessing special skills or domain experience, along with the relevant experience and expertise in a particular area, field, or discipline for conducting forensic accounting and investigation assignments. So the requirement here is having special skills, domain experts, relevant experience in specific areas. So we may require domain experts for discovering electronic evidences, for cyber security, for asset valuation, for voice sampling, for signature verification, for legal activities, or you may require an industry expert. Please make sure that those skill sets, if it is envisaged to be required to be done, it is available within our team. If it is not available on a 24/7 basis, please make sure that it is taken on loan, it is bought out, it is outsourced, it is given out, but those must be forming part of our team. And that is why even in auditing, when we were doing auditing, when we are required to do auditing, there are there are concepts like guest auditors. When there is some specific assignment that is required to be done in an audit, but we don't have that skill set, then we have to have a guest auditor in the team. So the work of an expert, that doesn't mean you're de-alienating yourself from the responsibility. Ultimately, the firm taking the assignment is responsible for the work, but he can get the work done by an expert, and the work has to be overseen, has to be supervised, has to be discussed very closely. It's not just an outsourced kind of a thing. You gave it off to the expert, and now whatever he does is okay. So the next standard talks about engaging with agency. So the law enforcement agencies are typically the central government, central or the state agencies mandated to enforce a particular law with the power to prevent, detect, and investigate non-compliances with those laws. Their powers may be restricted by jurisdiction or by the law that they are entrusted to enforce. Regulatory bodies are established to govern and enforce rules and regulations for the benefit of public at large. SEBI, IRDA, etc. are some such agencies. Adjudicating authorities refer to tribunals or judicial authorities established to interpret the law and pass necessary judgments in case of disputes. And agencies may also include international bodies in which circumstances the engagement may be governed by the rules and regular laws relevant to the particular agency or engagement. This was also one of the questions that had really come up. So in India, again, there is a list which has been given in the standards, and it includes the CBI, ED, EOW, SFIO, NCLT, ITAT, the IRDA, etc. The next standard is on standard 250, which is communication with stakeholders. Now, communication is something which is becoming very, very, very crucial, important, and something where there is no compromise so far as our profession is concerned. Whether it is for forensic practice, whether it's for auditing, whether it's for tax practice, whether it is for anything, I think communication is a very, very important soft skill that we must begin to possess. Because communication refers to sharing of any information or data between the professional and the stakeholders in any form, whether it is verbal, written, electronical, digital, etc. Or irrespective of the format, whether it is documents, images, videos, text messages, etc. The whole gamut comes under the word communication. So communication is something which is very, very important for our profession. I'll just take a pause. Thank you. So we must understand that there are primary stakeholders and there are other stakeholders. So anyone who is involved in this assignment becomes the stakeholders. And there is various ways in which there is communication. There is communication for the scope, methodology of the engagement. It's a written process. There are protocols to be followed. There are laws and regulations pertaining to the engagement. There is periodic reporting of engagement progress as per requirements. And this is something that I must call out. Even as a recipient, as a client, when we outsourced certain assignments to certain firms, what we definitely require, what the industry requires, or what the client definitely requires is periodic reporting. Sometimes I see firms doing a lot of good work, but they feel that if they start reporting to the client on a midterm basis or on a frequent basis, they feel that they're, I want to keep that joker in my up my sleeve. This might not be the best way to look at life. My request is that you continuously, periodically report the progress, because this is a two-way kind of a help. Let me tell you, it's not only what you are communicating to them. Many times the client will tell you certain things which you thought was definitely a fraud or definitely something going wrong. The client may give you a perspective which may open your eye and lead you to something else which is more important, more engaging, more fulfilling than what you initially progressed with. And that is why a periodic reporting of the engagement progress is something which I implore and request all the CA firms to definitely put it as part of their progress. Reporting format, unfortunately, as Deepa had also said, that for statutory audit, while there is a format, for investigation services, there is no reporting format. But here's an opportunity which I want to call out to each of you. There is something called a writing style. Make your firm have this style across all the people who are serving the firm. Make sure that there is a style of reporting, that there is a manner in which, when somebody sees your report, they should say, aha, this report is signed, I'm sure going to be in this firm, this report has come from this X firm, because that will become your style, like a signature, right? There are so many people, there is a 140 crore population in India, and there are 140 crore different signatures. Each signature is unique. Each forensic investigation and assignment is unique. So have a unique style of your reporting and make sure that these things are communicated. So what are the, if you look at it, what are the significant matters that you need to communicate? Some of the things I can call out is lack of cooperation by stakeholders causing significant delays. Don't go to the management at the last minute and say, no, there was no time because I'm not in a position to give the report because some stakeholder has not given us data. Some people did not give us the access, and don't go into that kind of a mode. Raise your hand at the right time and make sure that these things are flagged off. Prevention of access, withholding of information, general domination, intimidation by the stakeholders, potential conflict of interest, any alteration or destruction of evidences, safety or life-threatening situations. Make sure that these things are all called out at the right time so that it is a collaborative process in doing it. Standard 310 talks about planning the assignment. And here's a very important aspect, which I always say, things well planned are definitely going to be well executed. If you, even after planning, there is a risk of not getting the execution done appropriately. But if you have not planned the assignment, then there is a huge risk of the assignment not going the way in which you had intended it. So planning the assignment, spend more time, as it is said philosophically, that if there is a task given to me to cut a tree, of course, please don't cut trees, but if you're in the business of some wood and you have all the licenses in place, and if you have to cut a tree, then 80% of the time should be to sharpen the saw, and 20% then will be required to cut the tree. But if you have a blunt saw, then that cutting the tree is going to take a lot of time. So this planning the assignment is something that is completely required to be done to the T. Consider the risk factors, consider the limitations, anticipate the restrictions, anticipate all these things that are going to be required. Determine what is the appropriate work methodology that we are going to deploy to do this assignment. Think about the different diverse sources of information that where we can discover evidence, public domain, representatives of the clients, accounting systems. And today there is a information outreach, if you ask me, more information than what you require is available. Identify data and information owners. Who are the owners of this information? From where will I get data? What is the information that is going to be very crucial to this assignment? Map it. Evaluate the resources, skills, timelines that we have with us. What is the skill gap that I anticipate to have? How am I going to make sure that this gap is breached, is filled in properly? We should also use professional judgment for the process to be followed in completing the planning activity. Remember, each forensic assignment is unique and completely different from each other. The plan should be flexible to accommodate changes in the scope, because assignments of forensic nature are completely dynamic. Things will change very fast, very quickly, and therefore we must be nimble-footed to ensure that we are flexible in doing these in the scope, and we have the ability to do a midterm correction even in our own processes. Knowledge of the relevant business and the environment is something that is completely required. I do understand that we can't be masters, and if you're working for a big group like the Aditya Birla Group or L&T or Reliance Retail or Lupin or Onida, or I'm just giving out the names of the companies that I have worked for. And the knowledge of the relevant business is very important, because, just as you have a spread of clients, when you're talking to a mining guy, you should be talking almost like a guy who knows who's part of the mining. Tomorrow, when you're talking to the financial services person, you should be able to talk to him in the same lingo. When you're talking to an IT guy, you should be talking like an IT, like you should know the concepts pretty clearly, or you should have somebody in your team who's able to talk to him one-on-one, looking eye to eye. When you're talking to the insurance guys, you should be able to know the terms that are there. We should understand the environment that we are working in. Tough thing, easy to say on a seminar like this at 6:20 in the evening and just make a comment, but these are the things that we have to kind of understand. And I do agree with the person who raised the question that for 365 days people are doing the work, and we are expected in 4 or 5 days to come and look at things and point out. But I will say just one thing: we as auditors, we as accountants, we have this experience to us that we know what internal control shortfalls can lead to, how to pick up internal control weaknesses, where to understand where there are gaps in the environment. If tomorrow, if I'm going to play cricket and I'm going to bat, I can't say, "Arey, there are 7 fielders on the offside. Now, how can I penetrate the gap?" That is where the skill sets come into play. You should be able to master the ball, and the bowlers are going to bowl according to the field. They're not going to bowl where the fielders are not going to be there. They're going to bowl exactly to the field. But I think our ability comes in piercing these gaps. Discussion with the stakeholders is something which is very important that we must do. Standard 320 talks about evidence and documentation. Let's pause a while and talk about what is evidence. Evidence refers to the information, written or oral, or contained in electronic form, relied upon by the professionals to arrive at the conclusion on which the professional's report is based. Evidence includes information which is discovered from work procedures conducted, such as observation, documentation, process reviews, data analysis, etc., or gathered from internal or external sources, such as interviews, testimony, spoken recollections, etc., to the extent suitable in the court of law. And documentation refers, because we spoke so much about documentation. They say no work is completed until the paperwork is completed. Documentation refers to the aggregate of all evidences discovered along with written record of work procedures conducted, conclusions reached, and reported. It includes electronic records and correspondence in digital format, and incorporates details of project plan, engagement team composition, analysis conducted, documents reviewed, quality reviewed, etc. So these are the two things, the evidence and the documentation, which is very, very important to ensure that the work is completed appropriately. Let me spend a little more, about a minute or so, and talk about reliable evidence. Now, it's not just enough for us to get evidence. The evidence must be from a reliable source. The reliability of the evidence depends on its source. That is, from where you actually got the evidence. Example, internal from the entity, or external from the third party, the type and the completeness. So it is very important that you document from where exactly you got this particular evidence. And if there is a third party evidence, then the source of the evidence, the recording of the conversation after taking permission from the person whom you're recording. So all the rules and laws that are required, you can't just, quietly record this. Even if you see the Zoom calls, there is a public announcement that this call is being recorded. And even when you're doing any interviewing, the first statement that you need to make to the person being interviewed is that we are going to record this conversation. Okay. The evidence must be appropriate. That the professional, we must ensure that the evidences collected through multiple sources are appropriate to the objectives of the assignment and important to the subject matter. And the most important thing is that the evidence must be capable of being presented in a court of law. I'm sorry, I keep on talking about the court of law, but ultimately, please remember, most of these forensic assignments will result in us the report being used as evidence in the court of law. Then coming to our conducting our work procedure, that is actually doing the forensic assignment. So the standard talks about the indicative list of work procedures, and it talks about two phases. The first phase is the preliminary review. And in the preliminary review, what we have to do is identify the nature of evidence required to confirm the allegations or the possible violation, collect various data, information, facts, documents pertaining to the subject matter, look out for fraud indicators or the red flags, which means any unusual or suspicious circumstances, suspicious transactions, unusual trends or patterns, etc. And that is why it is very important for us to use data analytics in our assignment, whether it's an audit or whether it's a forensic investigation, the use of data analytics. And there is a specific standard on data analytics. But these data analytics, a meaningful data analytics, will throw out any unusual patterns. And from the patterns, we get red flags. And from the red flags, we need to establish whether there is anything which is of concern, or whether it's a normal deviation which has happened, but a wide deviation which needs the attention of the management. The management may have certain explanations about why it happened, but if there is something which is not which the management is not aware, then those things need to be very nicely brought out in our report. During the detailed investigation, obviously we need to do mixes and matches of many things. You have to conduct physical verification, you have to have field procedures, you have to go into the market, you have to find out, many times the very simple example here to give is, there are some addresses, but when you visit the site, you will find that there is no such business at all. Today, a lot of information is available to us through various websites for ownership of vehicles. There is the Vahan website, which will give us all the details about all registrations of vehicles and so on and so forth. I think there is no dearth of information today available if the right sources are picked up and appropriately done. So this is very important to document all these processes, since we talked about the importance of documentation. So these things are very important. Something which is very peculiar, or something which is very specific, not peculiar, but very specific to forensic investigation and accounting work, is conducting interview. Now, when I'm talking about interview, what I'm referring to is a structured meeting with individuals for eliciting information. While interviews are expected to be an interpersonal interaction with multiple facets, they are generally well planned and conducted within the framework of existing rules, laws, norms, and procedure. I repeat, within the framework of existing laws, rules, norms, and procedures. So whenever my experience has told me that the more time, just as I was talking about the importance of planning, the more you structure the interview, the more you kind of do a mock interview, you have your questions very clearly laid out. You have certain, anticipate certain answers. And if he answers yes, then my next questions are going to be the following. If he answers no, then I'm going to, follow a different route. I need to have corroborative questions. That means somewhere down the line, I must ask him a question, him or her ask the same question in a different manner, so that it corroborates with what was said earlier. And if it is in line with what was said earlier, then there is more chances that the person is speaking the truth. You must be able to, you must have the ability at times to ask open questions. You must have the ability to ask close questions. You must have a clear purpose why you're actually doing the interview process. Always make sure that there are senior representatives available in the interview when the interview is being done. Don't keep it as, the gentleman who asked the question, Srivastava, had asked the question. He said, yes, the work is done by the article clerks, but always supervised by the partner of the firm or by the owner of the firm. And at finalization is done by the partner. And likewise, whenever the interviews are being done in one of the companies where I work for, or I'm working, I don't want to disclose any names or anything like that. But we always ensured that there was a legal person available. The legal head was available. The HR head was available. If possible, the accounts person was available. The business, somebody was representative from the business, was always available for the entire interview, so that there is no biasness or there is no alleged at a later point in time saying that there was some pressure that he stole it under threat or under some promise or inducement. The interview was conducted. If the people of these three or four, whoever is available at that point in time, and that is why it is very important that these interviews are well structured. The persons are available and they give their whole at that point in time. They're not looking at their mobiles, they're not attending to some other work. They don't get dragged out of the interview and he misses something and comes back and again says, "Arey, kya ho gaya? What was that answer? You asked a very interesting question. What was the answer?" You can't afford to do these things. It must be done completely focused, these interviews. And the more focused we are, the better the results of this interview. You must have a minutes of the interviews well circulated on a need to know basis, not just give it off to. It's a very sacrosanct document. The minutes of these interviews are very sacrosanct, and you can't afford to just make sure that anybody or everybody asks these questions, these aspects. At this stage, I just take a pause and request each one of you to please post questions. I don't know, Deepa, if you had a look at the chat box, are there questions? Then accordingly, I can make sure that I leave time for questions, because I can keep talking. I can go on till 7 a.m. in the morning, not 7 p.m. tonight, but I don't really want to do that. So if there is are there questions flowing in? Then I can accordingly tweak my presentation. Otherwise, I can go on talking.
So you can continue. We can have last 10 to 10, 15 minutes for question, if any.
Okay, so I'll take another 10 minutes to kind of complete my presentation, so that we can leave. It's about 6:32 now. So another 15, 17, 18 minutes. So at 6:45, I'll stop. So we have 15 minutes for question and answers. And that will be a more interesting session than my verbal diarrhea, as I call it, till 6:45. But please bear with me till 6:45. And I'm also happy to see that there are still 122 people having faith in what I'm saying, and I'm really happy that you guys are still around, and that talks a lot about the quality of the presentations, quality of, I should not be saying speakers, I don't have the independence to say that, but I dare say that this speaks a lot about the quality of the members of the ACA for who have taken out their time and have the patience to do this on a Thursday afternoon or a Thursday evening, leaving both their official and personal work. I'm indeed grateful to each one of you to continue to be there in this webinar. I'll talk about section of standard 350, review and supervision. Of course, review is required. Review refers to the examination of planning and work procedures, discovery of evidence, conclusions that we get off, and supervision refers to the oversight of the activities which are conducted by the staff of the team. Now I'll talk about testifying before a competent authority, and this is, I would say, something which is very specific to an investigation or forensic accounting work, because if I see in many of the FAI engagements, a professional may be called upon to testify before a competent authority in relation to legal proceedings. And so who is a competent authority? A competent authority refers to a statutory or regulatory bodies and includes a court of law, an enforcement agency, an adjudicating authority, or any other judicial or quasi-judicial regulatory body empowered under law to act as such. Okay. So a testimony is a statement of the professional, whether it is oral or written or contained in electronic form, testifying before the competent authority on the facts in relation to a subject matter. A fact witness is limited to presenting facts as observed without expressing any opinion. A fact witness. A expert witness includes the expression of an opinion through the application of assumptions and analysis on the facts and by reaching a conclusion on the outcome of the work completed. So the standard talks about, or the expectations that we have is that it talks about how the testifying professional shall be independent. And I'm sorry, but this word independent and objectivity keeps propping up at all points in time, because it is the basic edifice on which we can do this particular assignment. And the testifying professional should limit the scope of his testimony only to the facts and evidences discovered during the course of assignment and not be presumptive in nature. He cannot opine something which is on which he is not competent to opine. And so that is a very important aspect, or something which is very unique. And this is the expectation from forensic accountants and investigators, that we may have to, at some point in time, we may be required to play this role. I was talking about applying data analysis, and standard 410 talks about applying data analysis. On the primary objective of the standard on applying data analysis are 3 or 4 in nature. One is to improve the probability of evidence discovery based on intelligence inherent in the data analytics techniques. I think the days of we used to be very happy with, if I remember when I started my auditing career, we would be happy by looking at all the transactions when the size of the business was small. Then we moved on to some kind of a rudimentary sampling. Then we went into scientific sampling and stratified sampling and so on and so forth. But today, I think the days of sampling is slowly gone. Long live sampling. What is now required, or what is now expected from the regulators, from the client, is that look at the complete data set. And by looking at complete data sets, it's only possible if we have an appropriate data analytics team, or which is supporting. Not only a data analytics team, but each one of us need to become very conversant with the data analytics tool. Whether we use Excel, whether we use IDEA, whether we use ACL, whatever techniques we use or whatever tools we use, we must, each one of us as team members must become conversant and kind of experts in using data analytics. It enhances consistency across forensic assignments with the use of similar processes, approaches, and methodologies. Even in a big organization, when different teams go to different aspects, different areas of the business, unless there is a common thread to really evaluate what the teams are doing, and this is possible only with advanced data analytics techniques. Enable identification of fraud indicators for further investigation. Data analytics will throw out certain red flags. It will throw out certain indicators which need to be dived upon. We need to see whether there is any fraud in that particular aspect, and all these things will only come out through an appropriate data analytics program. And to gain confidence over the reliability of results, derived from data analytics. Now I'll talk about standard 420. Don't go by the number. 420 has a little different meaning in our legal parlance, but evidence discovery in digital domain, and that's something which is of course becoming very important. Of course, I don't claim any fame on the digital space. My gray hair doesn't permit me to do it. Of course, I'm using gray hair only as an excuse, but I can really see smart kids coming up, and I'm very happy to see people like Deepa, Vivek, and so many others who are really, the next gen internal auditors, the next gen investigators, and that is something that I really want things to happen. I really wish and pray that internal audit heads, the heads of investigation, are not 55, 60-year-old people like me, but young, dynamic, nimble-footed people who not understand technology, but who use technology for everything that they do, whether it's personal work, official work, because technology is something that we can't wish away. We can't wish it to go away. And people of my vintage may sometimes get a little, feel a little overwhelmed by technology, but we can't help it. And that's going to be the way forward. And I really wish and see, hope and pray that audit heads, investigation heads are people in the age bracket who will respond when the age bracket of 40s, early 40s, late 30s to become audit heads and really take the profession ahead. Now, that doesn't mean that people above 50 do not have scope and they feel that, I'm saying that all this, but all that I'm saying is technology. And today, if you see investigation, the business volumes have increased so much. The methodology of doing fraud, of doing fraud has changed so much from that primitive way of, overwriting and all this, documentation. Digital space has become so far too wide for us to ignore this particular aspect, and therefore digital evidence, electronic e-discovery, that is the process used for gathering and collecting evidence in digital domain, which is used by a professional conducting an FAI assignment or other parties other than the professional or parties subject to legal proceeding. The digital chain of custody, there is so much that has to be spoken about. Digital footprint, and unfortunately the professional will need to undertake an overall understanding of the prevalent information system environment and its linkage to the digital domain insofar as it is relevant to the assignment objectives. So e-discovery is something that we all must be really understanding, and it is important that this aspect is not missed out. And therefore becomes the topic of using the work of an expert. If we don't have that typical expertise, then based on the needs of the assignment, we must use our best judgment to establish the sufficiency of credentials of the person conducting the e-discovery by using experts. Of course, needless to say that we must comply with all the rules and regulations. Then there is a specific standard on standard 430, which is on loans and borrowings, because there has been lots of cases. And, when we are doing bank audits and we are doing investigation in the banking sector, there has been lots of, and today, the NPAs, and as Deepa was also saying, in the last 2 years, because of the way in which things have changed, our work patterns have changed. There's enough and more opportunities for people to override systems, and therefore there is a standard on loans and borrowings, which I implore you to read, which talks about misutilization of funds, and it is important that we also, diversion of funds not taken for the intended purposes, etc., and diversion of funds. Asset tracing is also another aspect of our profession, which we must understand. And asset tracing is designed to discover the trail of money the assets offered as securities, and any other assets and activities created out of diversion of funds. And this is a specialized activity. It is not just, you just try to see it requires certain skills. And as part of asset tracing, we may have to consider the relationship of parties involved, that is related or connected parties, the means deployed for fund movements, that is use of shell or group companies, and the possibilities of various fund diversion techniques which may have been deployed. So then, of course, is the reporting results. And I think I need not talk too much about the reporting results. The book which Deepa has also co-authored talks about reporting also. And I think reporting is very important. It's and the report writing skills, the writing skills, the oral skills, the part of communication which I alluded earlier, and the report writing is definitely something which we must talk about, which we must definitely think about. The standards talks about the key elements of the report, which I would request you all to go through. The standard 610 on quality control, this is to ensure that we have a good quality control system, even before accepting the assignment, even during the execution, pre-completion of the assignment, post-completion of the assignment, our staffing and competency, and communication of our quality standards right across the quality control review, and the continuing professional education for which we all are here, the 122 of us sitting here on a Thursday evening, is nothing but continuing professional education. It is 6:45 by the clock. I promised I'll stop. So here you are. I would now take a break. I'm open to all questions. I'm sure Deepa is also around. I'll definitely require her around to answer any of the questions that might come up. So maybe Vivek, will you be able to take up the questions? Exactly 6:45.
No question as such. Anyone having any question, they can raise their hand or they can unmute themselves and ask the question. So now you try yourself, you can unmute yourself. I have given the permission to unmute.
Yeah.
Oh, Deepa ji.
Yeah. So now, now I can. So yeah. Go ahead.
There seems to be no question as such. So maybe the session was so detailed that everyone understood everything.
Yeah. Or it was so confusing that nobody understood anything.
No, the thing is, Satish ji, I would appreciate that now forensic is nothing which is new. People have to mature, the industry has to mature, but forensic is something which everyone knows about it.
Yes.
So everyone knows about it. And it is only maturity will come like still in India. Assurance itself has not matured. So leave about forensic. And we may see a future where people are talking about private companies not having to do audit. It may happen in say 10 years or 15 years or 20 years down the line. And only multinationals government will do forensic whenever required. You may not have only assurance practice, you will have only forensic practice where people have to go and do a forensic audit for the companies wherever government picks and choose companies. And we keep on saying that audits are going, GST audit is going on, assurance is going. But we also have to understand that we have been given this extra special status that only audits are being done by chartered accountants. Why we should enjoy that? We should claim what is there, and our ability should claim the work, and not our status as a chartered accountant should claim the work. So that is the thing which everyone should understand. Yeah, Dolly Majumdar, you have a question. Yeah, you can unmute yourself. Dolly Majumdar. Yeah, you can speak. Dolly ji, you can speak.
We can't hear you, Don. can't
Not
hear you.
yet. Yeah. Yeah.
I think she's not able to speak. And I would also say, Satish sir,
Yes,
that
please.
the what happens, forensic is not a rule-based audit or rule-based accounting. It is more with the experience. It is more like we all have, when we see a voucher, we are able to say that whether TDS is required to be deducted or it has not been deducted. Similarly, we would appreciate whenever we see a bank statement, how to decode the bank statement and how to think like a fraudster and take out the fraud should be the next motive. And I understand that in assurance, it will not be there. It has to have the special status of a forensic accountant. That's why we differentiated between the word audit and accountant.
Yeah.
But moving forward, we all somehow, like you have been in retail industry. I remember 15 years back doing an audit of a store and doing a time-wise sale analysis in an internal audit, and understanding that at the airport store at 12 o'clock, the accountant is doing some entries, false billing entries, and we are getting the figure. Or while we were doing, say, audits in 2011-12 in some manufacturing concern, and seeing the number of the vehicle, which was actually a bike number, and it was showing that GIN has entered from this vehicle. So this we all have been doing, but to have more focus on that way, that is what is required, and to take it to the next level.
True. It is
So correct me if I go wrong anywhere.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Actually, what happens, in an audit, there is a width that we need to address. There are so many things that we need to do, say, in 7 days, whether it's internal audit, statutory audit. There is a width because there is something that if I go for a manufacturing site, there are some 24, 25 things which I anyway need to do. Then there is something that the auditee tells me to do, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of width that is to be done, and it has to be done in a particular point in time. So in a investigation, it becomes a little more depth that you pick up one particular area, then go into the depth. You start looking at things with the third eye, what I call it the third eye, because that's the special skill that, the third eye will see. Two eyes everybody has, everybody sees it with the same two eyes. Of course, somebody sees more, somebody sees less. That's philosophically also that's the thing. But the third eye is the eye that you need to use. And that's the
Satish, one
sense.
more thing, as an article, we all have learned that audit can never happen from the AC room. You have to move out. Like we used to do after lunch when you're in the factory, we take a round of the factory and we understand, okay, this is the plant which is closed for 2 years. Why it should not be impaired? Okay, this is the item which is lying here since long, whether it's a standby equipment, because nowadays, thanks to work from home and pandemic, people have understood that sitting in our home, we can do audit and physically not visiting a client site. And many people are doing audit and not visiting a client's factory even once. Unless you go over there, then you will not understand what is required and what is not required. So you have to understanding your client, which is very much is there in the documentation of the standards and audit, but literally understanding what the client does. And we keep on saying our team that you should have the ability to replicate what the client does as a entrepreneur. If you understand that, you will think like an entrepreneur, and then only you will understand, okay, this is a bill which should not be there because this item is never used in a factory.
Correct.
So that inclination in the forensic becomes more important. Although we have been seeing that whether we are doing a GST audit, then in GST audit, what people see that if you're taking this input, you are a marble company and you are buying a plastic item which you will never use, why the input is coming. So it's a false bill. So that sense is always there as a professional or as an accountant. But giving that the forensic way, or forensic, you can say it's a term, but extending our audit itself is what is required. And we all have to pull our socks because it is about survival of the fittest. It's not about big four, non-big four, big firm, small firm. It's all about survival of the fittest. I know small practitioners who are doing only forensic work for 12 or 15 years, and he's doing very well.
Yes.
Why? Because it's a survival of the fittest. And we have to understand we should know something about everything, and we should know everything about something.
Something. Correct. Perfect.
So I think that sums up today's session. So for last final comment to Satish and Deepa ma'am.
Deepa, you go ahead. I think it would be better if you say something.
No, I was trying to, so thank you, Satish sir. I think that was a wonderful deliberation. I think people would have got the benefit of your experience, and especially on the forensic standards. So I was just trying to, answer this question which Dolly has, that,
Yeah, please.
about the checklist for management under various regulatory requirements. Can an auditor ask whether there were instances of whistleblowing reported in the audit period under review? Of course, not relating to employee grievances. So the answer is now. With effect from March 2022, you have to ask, irrespective of whether it's a listed company, unlisted company, there is a whistleblower mechanism, you have established a policy or not. The requirement is very clear that you have to make an inquiry from the management, obtain it in writing, ask them to share all the whistleblower complaints with you. And even if there is no whistleblower complaint, they need to confirm it back to you in writing that there is no whistleblower complaint. Because at the end of the day, you have to, as an auditor, state that you have considered all the whistleblower complaints. And this is applicable, CARO is applicable to all the companies besides your banking company or your insurance company, or to the smaller private companies. It is applicable.
When we are talking about CARO, there's one more very important point in CARO. Friends, gone are the days when we used to just copy paste our report and we used to just change the year. Please pull up your socks. Because like in key audit matters, you cannot write key audit matters if you have not done audit. Similarly, now in CARO also, you cannot fill up the CARO report if you have not done audit, because the things which has to be reported is very pertinent, whether it's about fraud or the other clauses also, whether it's about your uncertainty of paying liability next 1 year, or maybe it's about the reporting of the fraud is very, very much important. We all have done the test for the RBI compliance 50/50 test, section 45A. So whether that has been actually been checked, and many a time auditors feel that even if it's happening and company has not applied for NBFC, what is our role? So we have to really, as Satish rightly put, we have to open our third eyes, whether you are doing forensic accounting, whether you are doing internal audit, GST audit, or whether you are doing any audit. We have to think twice. And assurance is a specialized job. It is no more general job. It's a specialized job. So either you do it properly or you say, boss, it's not my cup of tea. I think that is what we have to understand now in 2022. Over to Satish sir for final comments.
Yeah, wonderful. I think very, very good, and all the best to your study circle. You guys are doing a great job, and I'm very, very happy to see more than 100 people there on the thing. Even in BCA, and I'm not talking and making any comparisons, but there are so many other forums I speak, and there are 30 and 40 people, but for a 3-hour session to have in 3 digits is something good. And I know, Vivek, you can take a try. Next time you can make a 4-hour session, maybe you'll get 1,000 people.
No, so next time we are doing a 2-hour session on 12th with Sandeep Baldeva ji.
I saw that.
Workshop on forensic. Yeah, friends, we have taken this thing that we'll do one program every month, and we'll update our members, not only our members, general public at large, about forensic accounting, because that is the thing, not because it looks very good. That has to be done by everyone. You are doing stat audit, internal audit, GST audit, whatever work you are doing, you have to have a forensic inclination. And just to inform Satish sir, when you started saying that we have 100 people and let's see how much people wait till end, I had this feeling because last forensic accounting program, we had 3 hours where Durgesh ji was there, you were there, and Mr. Anand ji was there. We had around 200 people till end. And now because of tax audit and others, we have within 2 days of spread of work, we have 100 people. It shows that people are actually inclined towards forensic audit. So thanks a lot, Satish ji and Deepa ji, because I pressed you actually for this session at the last minute and you accepted that. So lots of jugglery was there. Thanks a lot, Deepa ji and Satish ji, and we'll look forward more to have more sessions from both of you. Over to Hemant Lakhotia, co-chairman of Forensic Accounting Standard Committee, for formal vote of thanks. Hemant ji.
Thank you, Satish ji, and thank you, Deepa ji, for taking time out and taking us through the knowledgeable session on forensic accounting. I think forensic accounting, or we say forensic audit, the subject has evolved over time and has become a specialized area of practice. With business and operations going digital and are being done in complex environment, the risk of fraud has increased significantly. So this has increased the responsibility of auditors. I think your session has covered in detail the important aspects of the subject, which should help all the participants. So on behalf of ACA, I would like to offer e-memento for the session. Vivek, I don't have a right to stay the screen.
Yeah, carry on. You can share him.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
So we have also gone digital, and we'll email it to you. You can just print and laminate and keep it over there. So we'll feel ACA is also lucky to have
Yes,
a space in
Both
your
of
Zoom.
you.
definitely.
So thanks a lot. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
And thank you all the delegates, because without you, our session is never wonderful.
Yes.
So thank you for patient hearing and staying for 3 hours, as Satish put it. Looking forward for more session. We have another session on 29th on GST, on 31st on tax audit. You can just share with us if you require the link for registration. And we have a session on a third, which is with Girish Ahuja ji on budget.
Wow, wow.
And thereafter, we have on 12th on forensic accounting. And on 26th and 27th, we have Mr. MP Vijay Kumar, who will be speaking about
superb.
practical aspect of financial instrument for 2 days, 2 hours each, a workshop on financial instrument.
Superb.
So looking forward for a wonderful session again, and for you all joining. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Satish ji and Deepa ji.